Welcome to Stress Management Techniques Finding Calm in Chaos, an audiobook by Mindful Literary designed to guide you on a transformative journey toward tranquility. In today's fast paced world, stress can feel overwhelming, yet managing it is essential for our well being. This book offers practical strategies and personal insights to help you navigate life's challenges with grace and calm. You'll explore topics such as understanding the roots of stress, identifying personal triggers, and discovering powerful techniques like mindfulness, breathwork, and creative expression. Each chapter blends practical advice with personal stories, illustrating the transformative power of these techniques in everyday life. Whether you're struggling with daily pressures or seeking to enhance your overall well being, this audiobook provides the tools to create a more balanced and peaceful life. So take a deep breath, relax, and let's embark on this journey together toward finding calm in the chaos. Let's begin. Chapter 1: The Weight of the World. Understanding stress. Stress is one of those words we toss around so casually, yet its weight can pull a person under like a heavy anchor in stormy seas. I've often found myself in conversation with friends who say, "I'm so stressed out," as if it were just a fleeting feeling, akin to a passing cold. Yet, as I began to peel back the layers of what stress truly means, I realized it wasn't just an individual sensation. It's more like a universal symphony, playing out different notes in each of our lives. This chapter is about stepping into that symphony, acknowledging it in all its forms, and discovering how we each relate to it. My journey into understanding stress truly began on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The to-do list loomed larger than the sky. It was the day I first felt my chest tighten and my breaths become shallow. This wasn't merely about juggling work deadlines. It became apparent that stress can manifest in emotional responses, physical discomforts, and psychological turmoil. I reflected on my own life, realizing that stress wasn't an isolated event, but rather a spectrum I fluctuated through, like the changing colors of a sunset. That's when I decided to reach out to my friends, Sarah and Mark, both of whom have their own unique stress triggers. Their stories added layers of context, informing my understanding of stress as a multifaceted experience. Sarah, for instance, is a planner by nature. She thrives on structure and predictability, yet when her carefully laid plans go awry, when the kids are sick or her boss throws a surprise meeting into her day, their unpredictability sends her spiraling into a vortex of anxiety. She shared with me how she had learned coping strategies, such as mindfulness and journaling, to help ground herself when that familiar tension wraps its fingers around her. Mark, on the other hand, finds his stress rooted in the relentless pace of modern life. The constant notifications pinging on his phone, the never-ending political news cycles, and the pressure to respond instantly. Mark shared how he felt tethered to his devices, each beep igniting his underlying worry about missing out or disappointing someone. His mechanism? A digital detox, where he disengages completely to reconnect with what truly nourishes his spirit. As we gathered around our usual coffee table, I realized that while we each had different triggers, the essence of stress remained similar. It was palpable and real, weaving itself through our emotions, bodies, and thoughts. We are all part of a collective experience, yet our responses are dictated by our personal narratives. Understanding stress from this broader perspective shifted the conversation from mere acknowledgement to actionable strategies and coping mechanisms. I could sense the tension in the room begin to thaw as we realized how vital it was to share our burdens, to find solace in our stories. But as the evening faded, the conversation began to shift towards deeper struggles, and I could feel the gravity of our shared experiences weighing heavy once more, setting the stage for an understanding that was both enlightening and daunting. A moment of breakdown. The day began as it always did, with the sun pushing its way through the curtains, casting a warm glow over my small apartment. I blinked away the remnants of sleep and prepared for work, sorting through the to-do list that perpetually sat at the back of my mind. It was the usual mix of meetings, deadlines, and the ever-present hum of customer emails that needed responses. A part of me cherished this routine. It brought structure to my days. Little did I know that my carefully curated schedule was about to spiral out of control. Midway through what felt like an uphill battle, I could feel the walls closing in. My heart raced as I reread the last email, throwing my head back against the chair with a frustrating thud. Why can't I handle this? The words played on repeat in my mind, a relentless echo that amplified each wave of self-doubt crashing over me. I could hear my colleagues chatting and laughing outside my cubicle, their lighthearted camaraderie starkly contrasting with the turmoil I was experiencing on the inside. Each smile felt like a knife twisting deeper into my sense of inadequacy. As lunch passed, I found myself staring blankly at the screen, the numbers and words a blurry haze in front of my eyes. The more I attempted to focus, the more I felt like I was sinking, each breath becoming heavier, dragging me further down into oblivion. It was as if I were standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the world move around me in fast forward while I remained frozen in dread. I kept replaying every mixed-up email exchange, every mistake fueled by my growing frustration. I was trapped in a horrifying cycle of overwhelming emotion that left me utterly helpless. By the time I looked up, the office had quieted down, and the weight of despair clung to me like a second skin. I glanced at the clock and realized the workday was almost over, yet I felt no sense of accomplishment, only the stinging shame of failure. My hands trembled as I typed out a final attempt to salvage the situation, a mix of apology and desperation. But even hitting send felt like too much. I clicked away from my email and let my head drop into my hands, a low groan escaping my lips. It was at that moment, with tears prickling my eyes and a tightness in my throat that felt like a strangling vine, that I realized I couldn't do this alone. The fear of reaching out to someone gnawed at me. What would they think? I felt embarrassed, vulnerable, and utterly exposed. Yet, as the darkness surrounded me, I remembered Jake, my steadfast friend, who always seemed to have a way of seeing through my bravado, who somehow knew when to step in and lend a hand, or just listen. It took an immense amount of courage, but I grabbed my phone and typed out a simple message. Can we talk? The seconds felt like years before I saw the three little dots appear, signaling that he was typing. And when the response came, a simple, absolutely, I'm here. A small flicker of hope ignited deep within me. Perhaps this moment of breakdown wasn't the end. Instead, it could be the start of something new. I realized that embracing the openness to ask for help could change everything. In those few moments, with the weight of my emotions lifted slightly by the prospect of connection, I began to understand that this moment, the one that felt so catastrophic, could also serve as a catalyst for the profound change that I so desperately needed. My first encounter with calm. The day started like any other. The world felt urgent, a cacophony of demands dinging and ringing around me. I woke up late, missed my usual coffee, and somehow managed to spill orange juice all over my favorite shirt. I could feel the tension begin to coil tightly in my shoulders as I rushed to meet my friend Emily for that yoga class I had been hesitant about, but had finally agreed to join her for. I had never been one to seek out peaceful activities. Chaos was my norm, not calm. Yet there was a part of me that was beyond intrigued. As I entered the studio, a wave of tranquility washed over me, though I didn't know it at the time. Soft music played in the background, and the warm scent of essential oils mingled with the delicate whiff of incense. I felt like I had stepped into a different universe, leaving my frantic pace behind, if only for a little while. Emily greeted me with a smile, and her calm energy made me feel safe to embrace this experience. We rolled out our mats side by side, and as the instructor guided us through the first gentle movements, something unexpected began to happen. With each pose, I began to blend rhythmic breathing with the flow of the movements. I noticed how my body, usually so tense and resistant, slowly started to loosen. As I tried to find balance in poses I had thought impossible, I felt the chaos of my mind begin to quiet, like a roaring river slowed to a gentle stream. I remember looking over at Emily, who had her eyes gently closed, the corners of her mouth curling into a soft smile. It was as if she had discovered a secret, a hidden treasure buried deep within her, and now she was inviting me to partake in it too. As the class progressed, I experienced moments that I can only describe as transformative. Each breath in felt like an invitation to peace, and each breath out, a release of the tidal wave of stress I had carried for so long. I felt a tingling rush of energy coursing through me, illuminating the dark corners of my mind where anxiety had taken root. The gentle rhythm of the yoga movements stitched a thread of tranquility into the fabric of my otherwise chaotic life. However, just when it seemed I had tapped into this newfound serenity, the instructor guided us into a challenging pose, one that required focus and strength. As I attempted to hold my posture, I felt panic rising within me, an old friend rearing its ugly head just as I had begun to taste calm. My body trembled, sweat began to bead on my forehead, and the chaotic thoughts I thought I had relinquished came roaring back. Was this calm just an illusion? Would I forever be a juggler of chaos, never able to grasp true peace? In that moment, I felt a flicker of desperation claw at my insides, threatening to unravel the serenity I was chasing. I wondered if the brief moments I had tasted are ultimately just fleeting. Yet it was through that struggle, amidst the chaos rising just like my breath, that a profound realization dawned on me. I could choose to stay rooted in the tension or surrender to this experience. As I breathed deeper, focusing on the instructions, I decided to let go, holding on only to the present. My mind quieted again, and something curious sprouted in its place. Curiosity. What if this is just the beginning? I thought. Chapter 2: The Chaos Within. Identifying triggers. Have you ever felt that unmistakable tightness in your chest, or that whirlwind of thoughts that seem to spiral out of control? I have. It took me a while to understand that these physical sensations were tied to my anxious thoughts, but recognizing them was the first step towards managing my stress. I remember a particularly overwhelming week at work, a time when deadlines loomed like storm clouds overhead, casting shadows over my focus and productivity. I'd find myself staring at my computer, fingers poised over the keyboard, yet paralyzed by the fear of not meeting expectations. It was then I realized that work deadlines were one of my significant triggers. But it wasn't just work. As I continued to reflect, family pressures began to emerge from the background noise of my daily life. Social obligations, like gatherings or events where expectations hung in the air, became another source of anxiety. I often felt I had to put on a brave face, masking my apprehensions with forced smiles. It was during one of these family dinners that I decided to confide in my sister, Ava. I shared my struggles with the relentless anxiety built from work and social pressures. Her reaction was instant, an understanding nod, and the same spark of recognition that illuminated her own worries. Ava's journey mirrored mine in many ways, capturing the essence of shared human experience. Through our conversations, we peeled away the layers of our anxiety and unearthed the triggers that had been quietly steering our lives. I learned from her how preserving family harmony felt like walking a tightrope. One misstep could potentially disrupt everything. She, in turn, grasped how the relentless pursuit of being perfect at work suffocated my ability to freely express myself. These discussions made me realize that identifying our triggers, no matter how trivial they may seem, was not just a therapeutic exercise. It was essential for our well-being. As we unraveled our shared apprehensions, I felt a surge of hope building inside me, a silent promise that understanding these triggers could set us on a path to reclaim our peace. But that realization was just the beginning. It made me wonder, what would happen if we dug deeper? What if we ventured into the less explored corners of our minds, the places where fear and anxiety lurked? The very thought sent a shiver down my spine, yet I knew it was necessary. So what began as casual conversations over steaming cups of tea became an exploration of our most profound fears. Little did I know, the revelations waiting to come forth would shatter my perceptions of anxiety and reshape my understanding of myself. It was a journey I was hesitant to embark on, yet one that promised to be transformative. Reflections of my anxiety. As I sit in the quiet of my room, the world around me seems to fade into a muted background. The ticking clock becomes a heartbeat, reminding me of the moments that have shaped my understanding of anxiety. The term itself once felt like a distant concept, something that happened to other people, until it settled in my chest, a heavy blanket that smothered my breath. My earliest memory of anxiety takes me back to elementary school, standing by the classroom door, stomach coiling like a serpent, as I was called to the front to read aloud. The heat of embarrassment rose like a tide, drowning out the supportive faces of my classmates. Little did I know that this moment was the first of many that would etch the contours of my anxiety into my identity. Every interaction that followed carried a whisper of that first experience, a reminder that my voice could falter and my mind could spiral. I remember the dizzying sensations before public speaking events, the unrelenting worry about what others might think of me. My anxious thoughts often seemed louder than the rational ones, as if they were amplifying my fears while muting my confidence. It was during a particularly harrowing presentation in middle school that anxiety took its grip firmly around my mind. My palms were slick, my heart raced, and though I knew the material backward and forward, the words felt foreign on my tongue. The laughter and whispers that followed my stuttering performance became a chisel, carving deeper fears into the stone of my psyche. It wasn't until I found myself sitting across from Dr. Ruiz, a patient and insightful therapist, that I began to unpack the intricacies of my anxiety. Her warm demeanor put me at ease, transforming our sessions into a sanctuary of understanding. She shared that anxiety is more than just a feeling. It manifests from our environment, our past experiences, and even our biology. That feeling in your chest, she explained one sunny afternoon, her eyes steady and kind, it's your body's way of signaling danger, even when there is none. In that moment, I realized I had been treating anxiety like an unwelcome guest instead of an integral part of myself, the party crasher I scorned when it arrived, rather than recognizing it as a signal to take a moment to pause and breathe. With each session, Dr. Ruiz guided me through techniques to address my anxiety instead of suppressing it. I learned the importance of acknowledging my feelings rather than drowning them in denial. Deep breathing became a lifeline, pulling me back from the shores of panic. I began to write letters to my anxiety, expressing my frustrations and fears as if it were a misunderstood friend. This curious exercise transformed my relationship with my anxiety, granting me a clearer lens to see the patterns that had ensnared my mind. Yet, with each revelation came a new layer of tension. I was unearthing roots of anxiety that extended deep into my childhood, and there were moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable. As I reflected on my experiences, I realized that there were significant moments that stood out like beacons in the fog. The school dance where I stood idly, too paralyzed by fear to join my friends. The heartbreak of a first love that left my heart in tatters. The job interview that sent me spiraling into a week-long panic response. Each of these instances became chapters in my ongoing narrative of anxiety, a manuscript that felt increasingly fragile yet complex. Just when I believed I had begun to understand my anxiety, it would rear its head in unexpected moments, like a villain in a thriller, leaving me breathless and unsure. But with Dr. Ruiz's help, I learned that acknowledging these experiences was the first step toward reclaiming my narrative. You have power over your story, she asserted, encouraging me to believe that while anxiety was a part of my life, it would not define me. The tension loomed large as I pieced together my past, yet the promise of hope hung nearby, teasing out the possibility of peace. With each word I wrote and every deep breath I took, I felt the clouds of despair shifting. The conversation around anxiety had changed from one of shame to one of empowerment, revealing glimpses of light that I hadn't noticed before. I was no longer a prisoner of my fears. I was an author of my journey, armed with insights that could ultimately lead me toward healing. As I move through this intimate dance with anxiety, I find comfort in knowing that I am not alone. If my story resonates with you, then I invite you to step into the circle where we can embrace our anxieties, learn from them, and perhaps even find the strength to shine amidst the tumult. And while there may be more lessons to learn and tensions to face, I have faith that together we can navigate this path toward understanding, acceptance, and ultimately, peace. The onset of overwhelm. It started on a typical Tuesday, one of those days when the to-do list unexpectedly spilled over into chaos. I could sense it linger in the air, that muted undercurrent of anxiety that seemed to pulse in time with the relentless ticking of the clock. As I sat at my desk, bathed in the dull glow of the fluorescent lights, I felt a familiar weight pressing down on my chest, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, I was pushing myself a bit too hard. That week had been a whirlwind. Work had piled up with deadlines looming large on the horizon, family commitments added another layer of complexity, and frankly, my self care practices had all but evaporated into the ether. I had dismissed the warning signs. Late nights and skipped meals disguised themselves as a badge of honor, a testament to my dedication. But on that Tuesday, it was just one more email that tipped the delicate balance. An urgent request from my boss came in, a project that would require immediate attention. I stared at the screen, the words blurring as I took a deep breath, grappling with the creeping sense of being overwhelmed. In the days that followed, that overwhelming feeling escalated. My mind felt like an overstuffed suitcase that someone was relentlessly trying to zip shut, pressing down on all sides until I feared it would burst open at the seams. Each task I added to my list felt heavier than the last, and the moments meant for personal reprieve, reading, meditating, even simply breathing, became fleeting shadows. It seemed ridiculous that one more task could make everything come crashing down, but there I was, precariously perched on the edge of my sanity. I remember visiting a friend later that week, hoping to gain some perspective. We sat in her sun-drenched living room, the warm light contrasting sharply with the cold reality of my own chaotic existence. I tried to articulate the suffocation that had settled within me, how each chirp of my phone seemed to cut through any remaining space for calm. She listened intently, nodding in empathy, but I could see the flicker of recognition in her eyes. I wasn't alone in this struggle. So many of us had faced that moment when everything felt unbearably overwhelming. As I drove home that evening, the world outside blurred into a swirl of colors: traffic lights, beating hearts, individual lives navigating their own storms. I felt a growing dread knotting my stomach, the understanding that all this stress and tension I had kept bottled up would soon necessitate a release. Ignoring it would only lead to a bigger mess, I reminded myself as I parked my car. Maybe this was a lesson in vulnerability, an invitation to strip away the facade of control I had clung to for so long. Upon entering my apartment, the silence felt deafening. I tossed my bag aside and collapsed onto the couch. My mind raced, each errant thought competing for attention. I knew I had to act, to confront the shadows festering within me, but where would I begin? Taking a moment to breathe, I remembered something I had read. Stress is like a chain. It binds you tightly until you grasp the strength to break free. This was my moment to unshackle myself. But would I have the courage to begin? That simple acknowledgement was the first step towards clarity. I needed to untangle the knot of overwhelm one thread at a time. With each breath, I could feel the heaviness beginning to lift, albeit slowly. It didn't mean everything would simply fall into place within moments, but I was ready to face the chaos head on. Tomorrow would be another day, filled with tasks, yes, but now I held the reins. What would the next day bring? An avalanche of responsibilities, or perhaps just maybe, a clearer path through the tumult? Chapter 3: Breathing Life into Stress Relief. The Power of Breath. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I first crossed paths with Lisa, my yoga instructor. I remember her standing at the front of the room, her posture straight, her demeanor calm, as if she exuded a quiet strength. "Your breath is your anchor," she told us, and that statement has since resonated deeply within me. The idea that something as simple as breathing could wield such transformative power seemed almost unbelievable at first glance. But it didn't take long for me to discover the profound effects it could have on one's mental state, especially in high-pressure situations. In those early days, I simply participated, slightly skeptical yet intrigued. One breathing technique that Lisa introduced was the 4-7-8 method. Inhale deeply through the nose for a count of 4, hold for 7, and then exhale through the mouth for 8. The first time I tried it, I felt silly. It almost felt like playing a game designed for children. But in that moment of stillness, I had unwittingly tapped into something potent. By focusing on my breath, I created a small oasis of calm amidst the chaos of my busy life, where deadlines and responsibilities weighed heavily on my mind. My turning point came during a particularly overwhelming week at work. A major project was due, and anxiety tightened its grip on my psyche. Remembering Lisa's teachings, I sought refuge in the restroom, locking the door behind me. I felt my chest constrict as I began the 4 to 7 8 cycle, the familiar pattern gradually easing the burden of impending doom. Each breath carried with it the promise of perspective, clarity, and reassurance. As the minutes crept by, I was able to face the impending deadline with a renewed sense of calm. I emerged from that tiny sanctuary feeling more poised, capable, and ready to tackle whatever lay ahead. These experiences taught me that the power of breath isn't just a concept, it's an accessible lifeline that anyone can grasp. Regardless of where we find ourselves or how chaotic our surroundings may be, we always possess the ability to breathe. To this day, I continue to rely on my breath like a trusted friend, whether I'm heading into a difficult conversation or preparing for a presentation that sends my heart racing. The simple act of inhaling and exhaling becomes an anchor, a reminder of my strength and presence in each moment. As I share these experiences with you, I urge you to embark on this journey as well. Try the 478 technique or whatever breathing exercise resonates with you. Discovery often begins when we push past our comfort zones. You may find, as I did, that the breath doesn't merely sustain life, it enhances it. However, the true power of breath is revealed not during the calm, but amid the storm, as I learned one fateful day when things took an unexpected turn. Amid vibrant autumn leaves and a crisp wind, my breath would soon be put to the ultimate test. My first meditation experience. It was a cool Saturday morning when I first hesitated to step into the meditation retreat. The large wooden doors loomed like sentinels, inviting yet ominous. Had I made a mistake signing up for something I knew so little about? Doubts swirled in my mind like a caffeinated storm. I had read articles about the benefits of meditation, lowered stress levels, increased focus, a sense of inner peace. But skepticism gnawed at me. Would I be able to quiet my racing thoughts, or would I just sit in silence, feeling more restless than ever? As I entered the main hall, I was greeted by soft sunlight filtering through large windows, casting a golden hue over the cushions arranged neatly in a circle. It was here that I met Angela, a seasoned meditator whose aura seemed to hum with calmness. With a gentle smile, she welcomed me, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Angela spoke with a soothing voice as she shared her meditation journey, weaving tales of moments of doubt and distraction, just like mine. She whispered assurances that it was entirely normal to feel apprehensive about this practice. As the session began, I settled onto my cushion, altering my posture to sit cross-legged. Angela guided us through a series of settling breaths, and I felt the tension begin to seep away like warmth from a freshly brewed cup of tea. The initial 10 minutes of silence felt more like a battleground in my mind. Thoughts bombarded me. Grocery lists, work deadlines, and that awkward conversation from last week filled my head. Yet, with Angela's prompts, I learned to acknowledge these distractions without judgment, letting them float past like clouds in a vast blue sky. A palpable hush enveloped the room, and I found myself unwittingly swept away in the collective energy of the group. It was as if, for that brief time, we were all navigating the same mental labyrinth. Angela's voice would gently remind us to return our focus to our breath whenever our minds wandered. Slowly, I began to embrace the stillness, that profound quietness that enveloped me like a warm blanket. The struggle lessened, and a wave of unexpected peace washed over me. But just as I felt a sense of tranquility settling in, the sound of a bell pierced the silence, a sharp reminder that time was moving. My heart raced, anxiety clawing at the corners of my mind as I imagined returning to my chaotic life. Would this serene feeling vanish the moment I left this sanctuary? I could feel the tension build in my chest again, the niggling thoughts returning fiercely, igniting old fears of inadequacy and failure. Yet, it was in that moment of tension that I realized something profound. Instead of rejecting the storm of feelings, I could actually embrace it as part of my journey. Just like Angela had suggested, I began to observe my emotions without attachment. My first meditation experience was turning into an unexpected dance of self-awareness. It was not about completely quieting my mind, but rather learning to coexist with my whirlpool of thoughts, an art I hadn't even known I was searching for. As the session drew to a close, the transformation in my mindset became tangible. I had entered that space filled with skepticism and doubt, only to leave with a sliver of understanding. Though the world outside was chaotic, I had discovered that even within turbulence, I could find pockets of serenity. It was just the beginning of my meditation journey, but oh, how it filled me with promise. I left the retreat that day not just with exposure to a new practice, but with a small flame flickering in my heart, a reminder that amidst the noise of life, peace was waiting, provided I was willing to seek it. Learning to reset. It was one of those days where chaos and deadlines collided like a perfect storm. The office buzzed with the frantic energy of my coworkers, their fingers racing across keyboards, eyebrows knitted in concentration. I stared at my screen, but words and ideas eluded me. For hours, I had been trapped in a cycle of clicking refresh on emails that refused to appear and rereading the same report that seemed to mock my inability to focus. That's when Bob, my ever-energetic coworker, ambled over with his signature grin, suggesting a break. At first, I hesitated. Breaks? In the chaos? It felt counterintuitive. Yet, as Bob launched into an enthusiastic explanation of the micro breaks he'd been experimenting with, a spark of curiosity flickered in me. It's like hitting the reset button, he insisted, a twinkle in his eye. Just a few minutes away can clear your mind. Intrigued yet skeptical, I decided to join him on this little adventure. After all, what did I have to lose besides my sanity? We stepped away from our desks and into the small courtyard just outside our building. The sun bathed us in warmth, and for the first time in hours, I took a deep breath that filled my lungs with fresh air. Bob suggested a simple exercise. We would stretch like we were long-lost friends reuniting after years apart. One stretch at a time, I felt the tension release from my shoulders. We laughed as we contorted our bodies, mimicking awkward yoga poses, and for those few minutes, it felt as if the weight of the deadlines had lifted. It was liberating. It became evident that in allowing ourselves to pause, we invited clarity to flow back into our minds. Returning to our desks, I noticed an incredible shift. My fingers danced across the keyboard with renewed vigor. The bright red notification icon on my screen no longer felt like a daunting mountain to climb. Instead, it had transformed into a manageable pile of tasks. I dove back into my work, energized by our tiny reset. Bob and I decided that these short, intentional breaks would become a staple in our routine. We scheduled them into our day, almost like important meetings, and couldn't believe the difference it made. Yet, even as we embraced this thrilling new practice, one chaotic day stood out above the rest. A critical project loomed closer, deadlines approaching more swiftly than I had anticipated. The morning began with an avalanche of urgent emails that felt like they were designed to bury me. Bob looked at me with wide eyes, sensing my rising dread. That discussion about breaks felt like months ago, far removed from the reality of our workload. And that's when it happened. I could feel the familiar grip of overwhelm tightening its hold. My breath quickened, heart racing as I glanced at the long to-do list creeping across my screen. Suddenly, I was not just stressed, I was paralyzed by the fear of inadequacy. I glanced at Bob, who was settled into his groove, his fingers flying across his keyboard. Why wasn't he panicking? Why didn't it seem to affect him? In that moment, reality hit me like a rogue wave. I needed to reset, but I wasn't sure I could. In desperation, I rose from my chair, recalling our previous outings. Bob caught my eye, and without needing to say a word, he mirrored my intention, pushing away from his desk. We walked towards the courtyard again, but this time, everything felt heavy. The sun was bright, but the warmth did little to thaw my frozen thoughts. This time, however, there was no laughter. The stretch felt forced and heavy. The freedom from earlier now felt like a transient dream, and I fought against the tide of anxiety building up inside me. Then, as if sensing my turmoil, Bob turned to me and asked, "What's really bothering you?" And there it was, the boiling tension inside me ready to spill over. Would I let it out? Would I admit that for all our talk of resets, sometimes I felt utterly lost? The answer loomed in the air, heavier than the lifeless weight of the cluttered office, and as I took a breath, preparing to share my vulnerability, I suddenly realized how essential it is to break not just from our desks, but from our fears as well. Chapter 4. Building a Routine. Creating a Daily Ritual. When I first saw Clara's morning routine, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of jealousy mixed with inspiration. There she was, gracefully flowing from one task to another, sipping her herbal tea, journaling in her leather bound notebook, and taking a moment to meditate in the golden light streaming through her window. It all seemed so effortless, like the morning was her canvas and she, the artist. I wanted desperately to create my own ritual that felt just as nourishing and grounding, but where to start? It became a quest, one that would take me deep into my daily habits and ultimately lead to a transformation I hadn't anticipated. It was easy to stumble into chaos every morning, fumbling between scrolling through emails and rushing out the door, but I realized that these habits weren't providing any real sense of purpose. So, inspired by Clara, I began experimenting with little rituals. A cup of warm green tea became my starting point. As I held the warm mug in my hands, feeling the steam dance towards my face, I took those moments to inhale deeply, allowing myself to wake up slowly. This simple act grounded me, inviting me to savor the present and preparing me for whatever lay ahead. I started journaling soon after, pouring my thoughts onto the pages, whether it was gratitude for the little things or reflections on my dreams. Journaling became a companion, a safe space to sort through my mind and reinforce my intentions for the day. The more I committed myself to these practices, the more I noticed a shift. I began to approach my day with a sense of calm, as if I were wrapping myself in a warm blanket before stepping out into the world. But there was still something missing, a deeper connection to my ritual that I was yearning to uncover. One morning, as I sat on my couch, sipping tea and flipping through my journal, a thought struck me. How powerful would it be to add an element of nature to my routine? The connection was more than just aesthetic, it was instinctual. I decided right then and there to take my rituals outdoors, even if it was just to my small balcony. That morning light, the chirping birds, the rustling leaves, it became the backdrop of my newly birthed ritual. Each day, my connection to my rituals deepened. I began to explore other ways to personalize them, adding soft music to my tea time or reading a few pages of an inspiring book during my journaling. But with the joy of creating came an unexpected tension. As my routine became embedded in my life, the world around me began to shift, and not all of those shifts were welcomed. New work obligations, family challenges, and life's unpredictability started tugging at the edges of the sanctuary I had built. I felt the need to uphold my rituals, but found myself overwhelmed with the pressure of daily demands. What happened to that peaceful morning artist I had so carefully crafted? Just when I thought I might have to abandon this newfound joy, I remembered Clara, how she had embraced her chaos instead of resisting it. Perhaps, like her, I needed to adapt. The answer was not to abandon my rituals, but to bend them to fit my life instead of forcing my life to fit them. Could I make my morning ritual a flexible space where I allowed room for change and surprise? It was a question that led me to reassess not just how I spent my mornings, but how I approached life as a whole. I realized that the crux of creating rituals was not perfection, but authenticity. It was about finding what felt true to me amidst the ebb and flow of everyday life. Finding time for me. Carving out some time for myself felt like searching for a needle in a haystack. Between work deadlines, family obligations, and those seemingly endless lists of to-dos, I often found myself at the bottom of my own priority list. It was during one particularly hectic week that I met Nora for coffee, both of us lamenting about how life was moving too fast to catch our breath. Sitting across from her, I realized how we often let our own needs fall to the wayside, overshadowed by responsibilities. With the clinking of cups and the aroma of fresh coffee swirling around us, we dove into a conversation about reclaiming our time, something we both desperately needed. Nora was always the kind of friend who could see through my constant smile to the stress bubbling beneath the surface. "We need to be proactive about our me time," she said, tapping her finger on the table as if emphasizing a point. I nodded, feeling an echo of agreement in my chest. After all, she was right. It wasn't just about finding pockets of free time, but acknowledging that we deserve to carve out moments for ourselves without guilt. We brainstormed ideas, from simple practices like scheduling a weekly self-care date to more ambitious plans of taking weekend trips to recharge. The more we tossed around ideas, the more excited I felt about the prospect of prioritizing my needs for the first time in ages. Our conversation sparked a revelation. Self-care wasn't a luxury, but a necessity, a way to replenish our mental health that seemed perpetually drained. As we sipped our coffees, I shared my struggles with stress and how it had begun to manifest physically. Sleepless nights became regular, and my patience with my family wore thin. Nora listened intently, her wide eyes filled with empathy, but also a fire of determination. "We can't pour from an empty cup," she reminded me, and the metaphor struck a chord. It became our mission to not only envision, but enact practical steps toward prioritizing our mental health. We made a pact to hold each other accountable, to motivate one another in reclaiming our time. Then came the tension of our commitment. It sounded great, but how would we sustain it? Life, after all, has a way of attempting to sidetrack even the best of intentions. As the week rolled on, I found myself slipping into old habits. My calendar quickly filled with unexpected tasks and obligations, pushing the idea of me time further down the list. But Nora was there, sending gentle reminders and checking in, her unwavering support slowly eroding the guilt I initially felt. The turning point came when I deliberately blocked out 30 minutes in my schedule for a quiet walk, something so simple yet profoundly fulfilling. With the wind brushing through my hair and the sun kissing my skin, I felt a spark rekindle within me, a reminder that I was still there, underneath all the chaos. As our weeks unfolded into a routine, Nora and I celebrated small victories, but I could feel a building tension, something that threatened to derail our progress. I was on the brink of a major work project that demanded countless hours, and the weight of my responsibilities began to creep back in like a shadow. I worried about letting Nora down, and more so, letting myself down. Yet, in the face of this stress, I learned the importance of being both flexible and steadfast. My newfound realization was not about rigidly scheduling my time, but intertwining those moments of self-care wherever I could. Whether it was a bubble bath after a long day or a minute of deep breathing between meetings, I could find ways to fulfill my promise to myself amidst the storm. Just then, as I was about to feel overwhelmed, Nora texted me, "Remember to inhale before you exhale. You got this." It was that little reminder that stoked the flame of my resolve. But in the depths of my busy schedule, I found both anxiety and excitement swirling within me. Just when I thought I had a handle on things, an unexpected family emergency pulled me away from my plans and thrust my needs into the back seat once more. I felt the weight of panic settle in my chest. How could I stay true to my commitment when life was throwing curveballs left and right? Little did I know, the answers were always there, waiting just beyond the chaos, and the journey was about to take an unexpected turn towards uncovering them. The importance of consistency. Every day, like clockwork, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea steaming beside me, the pages of my journal eagerly awaiting the strokes of my pen. This ritual, shared with my friend Zoe over countless video calls, became more than just a practice. It became a lifeline amidst the whirlwinds of life. There's something profoundly grounding about the act of writing. The slant of my pencil on the unmarked pages wasn't just a way to pour out my thoughts, but a consistent reminder that I could cultivate calmness, even in turbulence. We often underestimate the power of routine, especially when it comes to managing stress. I vividly remember the murky days when anxiety loomed over me like a dark cloud, casting shadows on my every thought. Zoe understood this. She felt it too. Our commitment to journaling each day transformed what could have been an overwhelming, chaotic flood of emotions into manageable, digestible insights. We would message each other first thing in the morning, sharing prompts or quotes that directed our reflections. What are you grateful for today? Or what challenge did you overcome this week? Became our guides, steering our minds away from spiraling thoughts and towards gratitude and resilience. With each entry I penned down, I noticed a pattern forming, not just in my writing, but in my mindset. Consistency became my anchor. Each time I opened my journal, I could feel the weights of the day lifting slightly, replaced by clarity and purpose. But the beauty of this practice went beyond its immediate effects. It subtly taught me that when life felt unpredictable, I could create my own sense of order. There's a certain rhythm to daily endeavors that soothes the soul. Much like a heartbeat, steady and dependable, my journaling practice provided that vital beat, urging me onward. Yet, it wasn't always easy. I vividly recall one particularly chaotic week where deadlines at work threatened to pull me into a frenzy. I hesitated to write, fearing I wouldn't have enough time or mental space. But it was in that very moment I remembered Zoe's reassuring words. Even if you can only write a sentence, just do it. It's the act that matters. I resisted the urge to skip the routine, opted instead to scribble down just a single thought. That very act lit a small spark within me, a flicker of the calmness I had grown used to. I realized as long as I showed up, even in the smallest way, I was reinforcing not just the habit, but myself. As the weeks turned into months, my commitment to this practice remained unwavering. I often marveled at the collection of memories and reflections, a tapestry woven with my moments of joy, sorrow, triumph, and failure. These weren't just words on paper. They were reminders of who I was, where I had been, and how far I could go. Each entry filled me with conviction, reinforcing that embracing consistency was like nurturing a garden. In nurturing, we create space for growth, inventing resilient blooms amid potential chaos. Yet as I looked back, I also realized there was a delicate tension that loomed under the surface of consistency. What happens if I falter? What if my routine crumbles? The fear of failure made me acutely aware of how critical it was to maintain this grounding practice. I felt an instinctual pull to protect this part of my life at all costs, something familiar and comforting in a world that was otherwise unpredictable. And then, in a way that felt painfully cruel, life threw me another curveball. One evening, Zoe sent a message I never prepared for. Her father had fallen seriously ill, and with weight heavy on her heart, she confided in me that she wouldn't be able to write for a while. In that moment, I grappled with the stability of my routine. Would I still find strength to write without Zoe by my side? The journal, once a place of refuge, now felt precarious. Yet then, I remembered our discussions about the foundational role we built together, the importance of separating our validation from each other. Determined to find my footing again, I picked up my journal and began to write, not just for myself, but for Zoe. I shared my thoughts about her, what we had built together, and how her strength was woven into my emotions. As I filled the pages, I began to understand that it was okay to experience uncertainty, even as I maintained my commitment to consistency. Sometimes just showing up for ourselves, even amid chaos, is enough to foster resilience and hope. The tension between fear and calm exists, but perhaps within that struggle lies the essence of what it truly means to practice stress relief. Chapter 5: Nature as a Sanctuary. A Walk in the Park. There's something inherently calming about stepping into nature, a sentiment I've felt deep in my bones since childhood. On a particularly busy Tuesday, as the weight of deadlines and responsibilities pressed down, I impulsively texted my friend Leo, suggesting we take a walk in the park. The reply came almost instantly. "I'm in." That single word opened the door to spontaneity and relief. As we strolled through the park, the urban chaos gradually faded away behind us. The chirping of birds mingled with the laughter of children, creating an orchestra of life I had almost forgotten existed. We ambled along the winding paths lined with ancient oak trees, their leaves dancing playfully in the breeze. "Do you remember our childhood outings here?" Leo asked, a nostalgic smile playing on his lips. "It was like stepping into our own little world." I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through me. It was in this very park that we had both forged our friendship, running between swings and slides, our laughter echoing against the backdrop of nature. With every step, the heavy clouds of stress that had enveloped me began to dissipate. The science behind this phenomenon is well documented. Numerous studies show that spending time in nature can reduce cortisol levels and increase feelings of well-being. As we paused to admire a patch of vibrant wildflowers, I shared these insights with Leo, who looked genuinely intrigued. He had always been a numbers guy, passionate about data-driven results. "It's amazing," he mused, "how something as simple as being outside can change our brain chemistry." We continued walking, sharing thoughts on everything from philosophy to our latest obsessions with TV shows. The longer we talked, the more I felt my stress melt away. replaced by a soothing tranquility. I found myself immersed not just in conversation, but in the burgeoning tapestry of life around us. A squirrel chased its partner beneath the roots of a sprawling tree, while a couple shared a picnic, their smiles infectious. It reminded me of a passage I once read about how nature serves as a mirror to our inner states, reflecting back our emotions and soothing our troubled minds. As we reached the park's serene pond, I felt a profound sense of stillness wash over me. The water shimmered under the sun, each ripple capturing a moment of our lively discussion. Just then, Leo turned serious, his brow furrowing slightly. You know, I often find it hard to disconnect from work and just be, he admitted, his candidness laying bare the struggles many face. I guess it takes a conscious choice, doesn't it? I took a moment to reflect and realized he was right. Amid our ever busy lives, it was essential to consciously carve out time for those healing moments in nature, for they not only refresh our minds, but also ground us in the present. But as we continued our walk, a sudden tension formed in the air. The dreamy tranquility of the moment was pierced by distant shouts and commotion, sounds that seemed at odds with the park's peaceful aura. I glanced toward the playground where children played, only to witness a small cluster of parents rushing toward a commotion. Leo and I exchanged worried glances before instinctively moving closer, our leisurely stroll replaced with an urgency I hadn't anticipated. The atmosphere shifted, and the comforting embrace of nature felt abruptly interrupted. It appeared that one of the children had fallen, and the chaotic energy of concern brought a stark contrast to the contentment I had just been reveling in. My heart raced as I noted the concerned faces gathered around the child, who was on the ground, clutching his knee. I felt a pang in my chest as empathy surged within me. It was a reminder of the delicate balance between joy and worry, calm and chaos. In that moment, the reality of life echoed loudly. Nature, with its beauty and tranquility, served as a backdrop for the highs and lows we all experience. I glanced at Leo, whose expression had shifted from serenity to concern, highlighting the unpredictable nature of our existence. We were reminded that, although a walk in the park could ground us, it would never protect us from life's unexpected turns. Connecting with the earth, every Saturday morning, the sun cast a warm golden glow through the kitchen window, illuminating the well-worn table where I spent countless hours with my grandmother, Elsie. The conversations flowed as freely as the coffee she brewed, rich with the aroma of roasted beans and cinnamon. It was on those mornings that I first learned about the sacred art of gardening, where dirt under my nails was a badge of honor, and the rhythmic digging of a spade into the earth was more than just a chore. It was a serene dance. Nature heals, darling, she would say, her voice a soothing melody, and through gardening, you'll find your own roots. With each seed we planted, Elsie shared her age-old wisdom about the natural world surrounding us. She spoke of the gentle embrace of the soil, how it carried the weight of the seasons, and how, through care and attention, it offered a bounty that nourished both body and soul. As I knelt beside her, hands deep in the rich earth, I began to understand the profound relationship between our well-being and the environment. The act of gardening was a reclaiming of simplicity, a grounding experience that helped me manage the tumultuous waves of stress that life often tossed my way. But it wasn't just about pulling weeds or harvesting tomatoes. There was a magic in watching life emerge from the seeds we carefully buried. Each sprout was a testament to patience, each blossom a reminder of beauty. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky and cast long shadows over our little patch of green, I was confronted with a wave of emotions stirring within me. I had just received news of a difficult situation amongst friends, an impending divorce that rippled through our tight-knit community. The weight of it felt heavier than the spade I gripped, but just then, Elsie placed her hand over mine, grounding me in that moment. When the world seems chaotic, my dear, find solace in nature. Dig a little deeper, and you'll find your peace. That was the day I realized gardening wasn't just an activity, it was a pathway to mindfulness. With Elsie's steady hands guiding mine, we tended to our plants and, in turn, tended to our hearts. I learned to breathe in sync with the rhythms of nature, to slow down and appreciate the small victories. The feel of fresh basil leaves against my fingertips, the gentle buzz of bees working tirelessly nearby. I felt stress slip away like the weeds we uprooted. Here, amidst the flora, I found clarity and strength. As the months passed, the garden flourished, a patchwork of warm colors and fragrant herbs, but so did my understanding of our connection to the earth. Even on the tougher days, when anxiety loomed large, I would escape to that sanctuary we'd cultivated. I could feel the pulse of the ground beneath my feet, as if the earth itself was whispering that everything would be all right. I'd recall Elsie's words, "Nature's healing properties are always at your fingertips." How true that became as I lost myself in the tasks of watering, weeding, and just being present. But just as I felt I was mastering this connection with the earth, a storm brewed overhead one Saturday afternoon. Dark clouds rolled in, heavier than a shroud, and the winds howled like angry spirits. We scrambled to cover our delicate seedlings, a blend of chaos and urgency in the air. In those frantic moments, I was reminded of life's unpredictability, how quickly things could turn from tranquil to chaotic. It was a humbling experience to realize that even in my sanctuary, I was not immune to the storms of life. As the first drops of rain began to fall, I looked at Elsie, whose expression was a blend of worry and determination. "We can't control every storm, but we can choose how we respond to it," she said, her voice steady against the thunder. I took a deep breath, the earthy scent of wet soil filling my lungs, grounding me once more. Together, we braced against the tempest, our connection to the earth serving as our anchor. I realized in that moment that the lessons I learned while gardening extended far beyond the garden into every part of life. Perhaps it was not just nature that heals, but also the bonds we forge through it, across generations, through love and shared struggles. My forest bathing adventure. It was a crisp Friday afternoon when Michael and I loaded up the car, the scent of fresh coffee still lingering from the cafe we'd just left. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, excitement dancing in his eyes. I grinned back, trying to quell the flutter of anticipation in my stomach. This weekend promised to be an escape from our routine lives, an immersion into nature through the practice of Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, a term that I had only recently learned but felt a deep pull towards. The route to the forest was winding and lined with towering trees, their vibrant colors already hinting at the onset of autumn. With each passing mile, I felt the weight of city life slip away, tangibly replaced by a growing sense of calm. By the time we parked the car, the forest loomed before us, an emerald cathedral filled with whispers of ancient wisdom. "Let's leave our phones in the car," Michael suggested, his tone half joking, but laced with seriousness. I nodded, aware that this journey was one of presence and connection with nature, not distraction. As we ventured deeper into the woods, I was struck by the first sensory impressions. The sense of pine and damp earth enveloped us like a warm embrace. With each step on the leaf-littered path, I tuned into the orchestra of nature, the rustling leaves, the distant call of a woodpecker, and the soft crunch of twigs underfoot. "This is incredible," I said, finding my voice almost reverential. Michael was already kneeling to observe a patch of colorful mushrooms, his curiosity reminding me of the childlike wonder we often overlook as adults. Through our wanderings, I practiced the principles of forest bathing, intentionally slowing my pace, focusing on the sensory details around me. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, allowing the rich, moist air to fill my lungs. Suddenly, I became acutely aware of the difference in my mood. The stress from work melted away, replaced by a soothing tranquility. I felt connected, not just to the forest, but to something larger than myself, as if I was just a small part of this expansive natural world. As we forged further into the woods, the scenery shifted. We discovered a hidden glade where sunlight danced through the canopy, illuminating the ferns below. Michael pulled out a small notebook, jotting down observations like an impromptu naturalist. "You should write this down," he said, looking up. "It's like a therapy session, isn't it?" I nodded, realizing he was right. This was a dialogue with the universe, a chance to let go of the chaos and absorb the peace. Just as we found our rhythm, something rustled nearby, a sound that sent a shiver up my spine. My heart quickened. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael looked up, his face a mixture of intrigue and caution. We stood still, our senses on high alert. The forest, once a sanctuary, suddenly felt like an enigma, cloaked in shadows and secrets. The rustling grew louder, and for a moment I entertained a wild thought, a bear perhaps, or something even more mythical. When a flash of tawny fur darted across our path, my breath caught. It was a deer, graceful and bold, its eyes reflecting a spark of curiosity. Michael and I broke into silent smiles, our earlier tension dissolved in awe. As it bounded away, I reflected on the lesson here. Sometimes the unknown can bring unexpected gifts, but only if we dare to lean into it. As dusk approached, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, we set up a small campfire. The warmth of the flames flickered against the growing chill of the evening air. We shared stories, laughter punctuating the sounds of the forest as the world outside felt miles away. In this shared space of tranquility, I felt a deep sense of gratitude washing over me. The forest wasn't just a backdrop for our adventure, it was a balm for the weary soul, a reminder of the beauty within nature and, by extension, within ourselves. But the adventure was far from over. Just as the last embers began to fade into the night, a rustle echoed through the trees again, more pronounced this time. My heart raced as the darkness thickened around us. This sound was different, deeper, more deliberate. I turned to Michael, questions pooling in my eyes, sensing that the forest, with all its charm, was not done revealing its mysteries just yet. Chapter 6: The Art of Mindfulness. What does mindfulness mean? Mindfulness, to me, once felt like a buzzword, another fleeting trend promising clarity and peace in a world of chaos. I first stumbled upon it in an article while scrolling through my social media feeds, nestled between glamorous vacation photos and political debates. At the time, I scoffed at the idea, dismissing it as yet another self-help fad. But that changed when I signed up for a mindfulness workshop led by a woman named Karen, who would challenge and expand my understanding in ways I never anticipated. Walking into the dimly lit room on that rainy Saturday morning, I felt a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The walls were adorned with serene landscapes, and soft instrumental music floated through the air, creating a cocoon of tranquility that clashed with the swirling mess in my mind. Karen was magnetic. Her presence exuded warmth and confidence, immediately capturing the room's collective attention. I could tell this wasn't just another seminar. This was going to be an experience. As the workshop progressed, Karen began by redefining mindfulness, peeling away layers of misconceptions. "It's not just awareness," she said, her eyes scanning the room, locking onto mine for a brief moment. "It's about engaging fully with the present moment, without judgment." I found myself leaning forward, fully invested in her words. She spoke of mindfulness as a practice grounded in compassion, first for ourselves, then for others. It felt revolutionary, like I had stumbled upon a hidden gem in a cluttered, predictable world. Through exercises like mindful breathing and guided meditations, I slowly discovered the beauty in simply being. I remember vividly one particular exercise. We were asked to eat a raisin, and for the first time, I understood what it meant to be entirely present. The texture, the taste, the sweet burst of flavor. It was a revelation. My mind had always raced ahead, fixated on tomorrow's to-do list until that moment. I felt alive, anchored in the now, and it sparked a change within me. But this journey wasn't just about those peaceful moments. Karen introduced us to the idea of being with discomfort, a concept that shook the very foundation of my belief in mindfulness. She emphasized that it isn't about escaping pain or stress, but rather acknowledging and embracing them. Mindfulness means you sit with your feelings, even when they're messy, she explained. The challenge in her voice resonated deeply with me, igniting a flicker of unease. I had spent a lifetime avoiding discomfort. How could I possibly welcome it? As the workshop neared its conclusion, Karen encouraged us to reflect on our personal barriers to mindfulness. I felt a knot twist in my stomach as I considered my compulsive need to control every aspect of my life. It all came rushing at me, my anxieties, my fears, the whirlwind of thoughts I constantly drowned in. What if I let go, I thought, terrified yet exhilarated. What lay on the other side of that question? With these swirling thoughts occupying my mind, Karen led us into our final meditation. I closed my eyes, breathing in deeply, sending my awareness to the thoughts that buzzed like flies, buzzing louder in the silence. The air felt thicker, The energy in the room converged as I surrendered to the moment. It was then that I realized mindfulness isn't a destination, it's a lifelong journey of self discovery, engaging with each moment as it comes, both sweet and bitter. The tension built within me, leaving a lingering question: was I ready to embrace this messiness, or would I remain tethered to fear? As we opened our eyes, vulnerability seemed to weave through the room, uniting us in shared uncertainty. The workshop ended, but my exploration had only just begun. I could feel that shift, the idea that mindfulness was more than just a state of being. It was a courageous invitation to face myself fully. And as I walked out into the rain, I knew that despite the tension lingering in my chest, I was ready to embark on this profound journey of becoming, one mindful breath at a time. Practicing presence. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I first grasped the true essence of presence. I sat in my favorite park, the dazzling colors of the leaves swirling around me like a vibrant tapestry. Yet, instead of taking it all in, I was scrolling through my phone, lost in an endless stream of notifications and thoughts that whisked me away from that very moment. It took an earnest push from my mindfulness instructor to awaken my awareness. "Look up," she said during one of our sessions. "The world is waiting for you to engage with it." Her words nudged me into a realization. Life happens here and now, not in the tiny screen of my device, nor in worries about tomorrow. This chapter is a collection of those reflections, a journey toward embracing presence in the clutter of daily life. As I began to practice mindfulness, I became more attuned to the subtle yet profound shifts that occurred during unremarkable moments. Take, for example, my morning coffee ritual. Initially, I would rush through it, my mind already racing to the tasks awaiting me. But one day I paused. I focused on the warm mug in my hands, the rich aroma swirling upwards, the comforting warmth seeping into my palms. Each sip became a small revelation. I tasted the sweetness of the cream, the boldness of the coffee, and the serenity in simply being. By shifting my attention to the small acts, I unlocked a door to deeper appreciation, tempering the chaos of my thoughts. This practice doesn't require grand gestures. It starts with a conscious decision to immerse oneself in the now. But being present isn't always easy. The distractions of life can sometimes feel overwhelming. One evening, I sat at the dinner table with my family, wanting to connect yet battling the urge to check my messages. Then my teenage daughter caught my eye. She was animatedly sharing a story, her hands painting pictures in the air. In that moment, I made a choice. I closed my phone, leaned in, and listened. Her laughter filled the room, and I found myself reveling in her joy. It was a reminder that while our bodies can be present, our minds can often wander. The irony hit me hard. The more I immersed myself in my family's energy, the less I felt the weight of the world's distractions. I realized that choosing presence wasn't merely a task. It became a pathway to deeper connections and ultimately happiness. But what do we do when distractions pull us back into oblivion? It's about creating anchors, those small rituals we can tether ourselves to amidst life's tumult. For me, it was adopting a simple practice of taking deep breaths before important meetings or conversations. I discovered that those few moments of mindful breathing calmed my racing heart and sharpened my focus. An impactful moment came when I felt anxiety creeping in before a presentation. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and envisioned each breath as a wave washing over me, clearing the clutter from my mind. When I opened my eyes, I was grounded, calm, and wholly present. The shift was palpable. No longer was I a vessel of nerves, I was a participant in a conversation. It's astonishing how such little techniques can turn chaos into clarity. As I reflect on the past months, I now see practicing presence like a warm embrace, profoundly familiar, yet richly transformative. However, I also recognize that the journey isn't linear. Some days are easier than others. Just the other day, I found myself caught in the hustle of a busy grocery store, my mind flitting between the items on my list and the worries of the upcoming week. The sensory overload began to swirl within me until I paused by the produce aisle, surrounded by vibrant fruits. I picked up a pear, noticed its delicate texture, and took a moment to appreciate its journey from orchard to my hands. It wasn't just about the pear. It was a gentle reminder that even in hectic moments, I could reclaim my attention. Each mindful interaction became a gentle nudge to stay grounded in the present. But here's the kicker. While these practices have been grounding, I've learned that life can throw unexpected curveballs. I recall one afternoon when I received a phone call that shifted everything. As I sat in my quiet living room, the news washed over me like a sudden storm, uninvited and chaotic. The stillness I had worked so hard to cultivate felt ripped away in an instant. But instead of spiraling, I took a breath. A big, deep, deliberate breath. It transformed my response. I sat there, allowing myself to feel the weight of the emotions while acknowledging the beauty in that very moment. That was presence. Embracing whatever life handed me, the good and the bad, and recognizing that even in the darkest times, I could choose how to respond. As I share these narratives, I hope they resonate with you, dear reader. Practicing presence isn't merely an idea, it's an invitation. It's a continuous journey filled with moments worth cherishing, filled with the potential for deeper connections, brighter joys, and unshakable resilience. The truth remains, in our ever chaotic world, presence isn't the absence of distraction. It's the art of engaging with life as it unfolds, moment by moment. As you venture forth, consider what anchors you in your day-to-day life. When life starts to spin a little too fast, how will you ground yourself? Because ultimately, presence is about weaving awareness into the fabric of our daily existence. One breath, one sip of coffee, one heartfelt conversation at a time. My journey in mindful eating. My relationship with food had always been a complicated one. Growing up, my meals were often hurried affairs, gobbled down in front of the television or while juggling the demands of homework and extracurricular activities. When I began working full-time, those patterns only intensified. But everything shifted when I met Lauren, my nutritionist. She had a calm demeanor and an infectious enthusiasm that intrigued me right from our first meeting. I remember her emphasizing the importance of slowing down and truly savoring each bite, an alien concept in my fast-paced life. With each session, Lauren guided me through the process of mindful eating, a practice that seemed daunting at first but became a sanctuary from my hectic daily schedule. She encouraged me to step away from distractions. No phone, no television, no multitasking. It felt liberating and terrifying. What would I do with all that quiet? I started experimenting with this practice in small doses. At my next meal, I took a deep breath before sitting down to eat. I observed the colors, the scents, the textures of my food. As I took my first bite, I focused on the flavors, letting the richness of the spices and the freshness of the vegetables dance on my tongue. It was a revelation. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. There were days when I found my mind wandering back to my old habits. I'd catch myself scrolling through my phone or sneaking bites of food on the go. Each time I slipped, I reminded myself of Lauren's voice, guiding me back to the moment. It was essential to be patient with myself, she said, as mindful eating was as much about the journey as it was about the destination. I learned to appreciate the fact that I was living through each meal, rather than simply consuming it. And as if my newfound awareness was inviting deeper reflection, I began to question not just how I ate, but why I ate. Was I really hungry, or was I just bored? This process of inquiry laid the groundwork for profound changes in my life, even beyond the dining table. As time passed, I began to look forward to my meals rather than view them as interruptions. I found joy in preparing my food, too, taking the time to chop vegetables, measure spices, and create colorful, nourishing dishes. Each meal became a ritual, a moment to connect with myself and with the food that nourished me. I experimented with new recipes, savoring each creation as it transformed into something beautiful on my plate. Yet, just as I thought I was mastering this art of mindful eating, an unexpected challenge presented itself one Sunday afternoon. I had invited friends over for dinner, an occasion I was genuinely excited about. I meticulously planned the menu: a vibrant quinoa salad, roasted vegetables, and a decadent chocolate mousse for dessert. As the evening unfolded, laughter and chatter filled the air, but I noticed my old habits resurfacing. The thrill of entertaining pulled me in, leaving me torn between preparing food and fully immersing myself in the moment. I felt the urge to rush through dinner to serve dessert and keep the momentum going. Suddenly, I was back in the whirlwind I had worked so hard to escape. As I caught a glimpse of my friends devouring the dishes I had lovingly prepared, a sense of guilt washed over me. Was I neglecting my practice? I paused, took a deep breath, and recalled Lauren's lessons. This was my opportunity to cherish the moment, to savor the flavors not just alone, but together. I joined my friends at the table, slowing down the pace and inviting them to share their thoughts on each dish. The conversation flowed as freely as the wine, and while I may not have perfectly embodied mindful eating that night, I flourished in connection and camaraderie. Perhaps that was the essence of it all. In that moment, I learned that mindful eating isn't just about solitude, it's about being fully present, no matter the circumstances. As dessert was served and we fell into a blissful silence, each of us lost in the richness of the chocolate, I found my heart swelling with gratitude. I realized that I wasn't merely a person reconciling my relationship with food, I was learning to embrace life itself. Yet, as the night pulled to a close, the question lingered. Could I maintain this balance? Could I integrate the mindfulness I had cultivated into moments of chaos, like gatherings with friends? As the shadows of doubt crept in, I felt the tension building, a reminder that the journey of mindful eating and life was still unfolding. Chapter 7: The Power of Connection. Reaching Out. The world often feels like a stage where everyone else is performing flawlessly, while I stand in the shadows, grappling with my inner turmoil. I remember the summer of 2 years ago, a season that should have been bright with potential, but instead unfolded like a dark comedy. I had just lost my job, an unexpected blow that left me questioning my self-worth and capabilities. I was stuck in a cycle of sleepless nights and distracted days, my mind bouncing around between panic and despair like a pinball in an abandoned arcade. It was during this tumultuous time that Sarah, my ever-reliable friend, reached out. She could sense the riptide of my emotions threatening to pull me under. Sarah and I had been friends since college, but I never fully appreciated her uncanny ability to read people until that moment. "Let's talk," she whispered over the phone, her voice soothing like a balm. I hesitated, fearing that vulnerability might expose the cracks in my facade, even more, that it might shatter the idealized image of the strong one that I had carefully crafted. But here's the paradox I learned. That very act of reaching out, of admitting my struggles, was where strength truly resided. As we talked, layer by layer began to peel away, revealing a heart wrapped in shame and fear. I learned that sharing our burdens doesn't burden others, but invites them to share in the essence of who we are. Our conversations morphed into a ritual, a lifeline that kept my spirits afloat and fortified our bond. Sarah shared her own struggles with anxiety and self-doubt, and suddenly our exchanges became two-way streets. Not just me unloading my woes, but also a place where she could unburden herself. Through our chats, I grasped a powerful truth. Vulnerability can deepen relationships, adding texture and dimension like a well-painted canvas. With every heartfelt confession, the fortress I had built around myself crumbled, revealing a foundation of understanding, empathy, and authenticity. It was a remarkable shift. Instead of feeling exposed and fragile, I began to feel liberated, like the very act of asking for support transformed my despair into hope. But that summer also brought unexpected challenges. Just as I started to float, tethered to Sarah's unwavering support, life threw another curveball. A family crisis erupted, one that I didn't see coming. My mother was hospitalized unexpectedly, and the weight of uncertainty came crashing down. In that moment, I experienced a terrifying realization. Facing trials alone can lead to isolation, but sharing them with someone who truly cares can empower you to weather the storm. I called Sarah again, and as we navigated through this new chaos together, it became clearer than ever. I needed her just as much as she needed me. The irony? Reaching out became a double-edged sword. While it fortified our friendship, it also shone a magnifying glass on my fears. What if I overwhelmed her? What if my vulnerability was a burden? That tension simmered beneath our conversations, a silent specter lurking in the background, whispering doubts that clawed at my resolve. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that relationships flourish in reciprocity. This wasn't just about me, but about creating a resilient connection. As I leaned into these moments of authenticity, I learned how crucial it is to support one another in times of need. The conversations weren't just cathartic, they were transformative. Our talks spiraled into late night coffee runs and the occasional burst of laughter that pierced through the tension. Both of us, in our moments of raw honesty, found strength in knowing we weren't navigating this labyrinth of life alone. Each time I heard Sarah's laughter mixing with my tears, every point of connection we forged, it became clear. Reaching out could lead to unexpected joys, even in the darkest times. Building a support network. Building a support network might sound daunting, but let me assure you, it's one of the most empowering things I've done in my life. At first, I didn't even know where to start. I remember looking around my small apartment, feeling a profound sense of isolation despite being surrounded by people. My friends and family loved me, but it wasn't enough. I craved deeper connections, a tribe that understood the unique struggles I faced. So I took a step back and pondered what truly mattered to me. What were my passions? What activities made me feel alive? That's when I realized that connecting with communities centered around shared interests was the answer. I scoured the internet for local groups, book clubs, hiking teams, and art workshops. Each click of the mouse felt like I was peeling back layers of my loneliness, revealing opportunities filled with potential and promise. My first foray into this new world was a seemingly innocuous Tuesday evening at a local coffee shop. I attended a poetry reading, nerves fluttering as I walked in. The atmosphere was electric, filled with the sound of creativity and collaboration. I was immediately struck by the warmth of the attendees who, like me, were searching for a space to express themselves. As I listened to others recite their verses, I felt an exhilarating sense of understanding wash over me. Their words spoke my feelings, an unvoiced symphony of shared experiences. This was the magic of finding my niche, a place where I belonged. Slowly, I began forming relationships. I found mentors among seasoned poets and shared laughs over coffee with budding writers like myself. Each conversation revealed a new layer of connection. I shared my triumphs and failures, and each anecdote brought me closer to these individuals who once felt like strangers. We celebrated our highs together and leaned on each other during lows, making the emotional roller coaster of life feel less daunting. Among those conversations were small moments that fortified my resolve. One evening, after sharing a particularly vulnerable poem, a fellow attendee approached me, her eyes shimmering with empathy. "You have a gift," she said. "Your words touch hearts." I could hardly believe it. Those words ignited a fire within me, a reminder that we all have a story worth telling, worth sharing with others. As my network grew, so did the collective strength we shared. We rallied around each other during hardships, whether it was a job loss, personal tragedy, or mental health struggles. The power of having people who understood my journey was transformative. I wasn't just navigating life alone, I was part of something greater, a web of support that stretched far and wide. But let's be real, building this network didn't always come easy. I faced moments of rejection and disappointment, especially when I sought out groups that didn't feel quite right. There were gatherings where I felt just as lost as I did before. However, each experience was a lesson. It taught me to trust my instincts, to seek spaces that resonated deeply with my core values and aspirations. Then came the moment that shook my world. A close friend of mine faced a serious health scare. I was paralyzed by fear and uncertainty, unsure how to support her while also grappling with my own emotions. That's when my support network truly came into effect. I reached out to the friends I'd made through my poetry community, who rallied around me, offering both practical assistance and emotional grounding. Together, we organized meal trains and visits, showing my friend she was not alone in her fight. The incident cemented the notion that networks aren't just about connection, but about responsibility and care. With each act of kindness, each shared moment of joy and sorrow, we were weaving a bond that would shield us against life's inevitable storms. In retrospect, all these experiences taught me that building a support network is about being proactive and vulnerable. It's about stepping into spaces where you might not feel entirely comfortable, but where growth happens. Sometimes that meant sitting in silence with those who understood my struggles, or boldly sharing my story, which opened the floodgates for others to share theirs. It fosters an environment where we can all thrive together. Now, as I look at the tapestry of relationships I've woven over the years, I can't help but feel a swell of gratitude. Each connection, whether deep or fleeting, has contributed to the person I am today. My network is not just a buffer against hard times, it's a celebration of life's richness, and it reminds me daily that I am never truly alone. The healing nature of conversations. There's something almost magical about a conversation. It's a simple exchange, yet it has the power to heal wounds buried deep within our hearts and minds. I discovered this truth during one of the most challenging periods of my life, when everything felt like a dissonant symphony of doubt and despair. I had never been one to open up easily, keeping my worries locked away as if they were precious gems too dangerous to share. But that changed when I found myself sitting across from Alex, my best friend and my confidant, sipping lukewarm coffee that we both ignored as the weight of my worries loomed large over our small table. "What's going on?" Alex asked, his brow furrowing slightly, a sure sign he sensed the turmoil within me. Those 4 words triggered something inside me. Slowly but surely, the dam I had built around my feelings began to crack. I remember feeling like each word I shared was a small bid for freedom. The anxiety wrapped tightly around my chest, the overwhelming fear of the future. However, as I spoke, I also noticed the flicker of understanding in Alex's eyes. It was as if my words were not heavy burdens, but rather feathers, set free to float into the air, lightening my load. I poured out my thoughts, not just the dark clouds that seemed to hover above, but also the confusion and self-doubt that clouded my vision, and in doing so, the world around me began to shift. What struck me deeply was how Alex didn't just listen. He engaged, reflecting back to me the understanding I desperately needed to hear. It was more than just a conversation. It was a genuine connection, steeped in empathy. Every nod, every soft-spoken word of encouragement validated my feelings. I've since learned that conversations like this create what psychologists call a safe space. In these moments of vulnerability, the healing begins. The ability to express oneself, to articulate fears and dreams, becomes a pivotal step towards clarity. Research supports this too. Studies have shown that talking about our feelings can lower stress levels, decrease anxiety, and improve our overall mental well-being. As I spoke, I noticed something remarkable happening. I started to understand my own feelings better. Words formed clarity that had eluded me before. I found not only comfort, but also insight into the underlying issues plaguing me. The dialogue between us was rich, filled with shared experiences and exchanged wisdom, transforming a painful sharing into a journey of discovery. I began to see paths forward, solutions that had been obscured by self-doubt and fear. This moment taught me that conversations are more than mere exchanges. They are invitations to explore and understand ourselves deeply. By the end of the evening, the initial weight of my worries didn't completely dissolve, but something had shifted. Alex's encouragement created a ripple effect within me, prompting a renewed sense of hope. I realized that opening up was not a sign of weakness, but rather a courageous act of self-love. In that moment of vulnerability came the profound understanding that everyone struggles in silence, yet we possess the extraordinary ability to reach out and connect with one another. Each conversation holds the potential to illuminate our dark places, offering support and understanding. Yet as I pondered this freedom, a sudden fear tugged at my heart. What if I had never summoned the courage to share? What if that silence had lingered, continuing to weigh on me like a shadow? Could I have found my way out of that darkness alone? The thought spiraled in my mind, growing louder and more urgent. I understood now that the path to healing required both vulnerability and an invitation to engage. In that uncertainty, I recognized the critical nature of reaching out, not just for myself, but for others who may be fighting their own hidden battles. The urgency of connection resonated deeply within me, sparking an intense desire to extend this gift of conversation beyond the comfort of my friendship with Alex. The healing didn't stop with my personal journey, but opened a door to something much larger. I felt a call to create safe spaces for others, to foster conversations that could transform lives. Just as Alex had been there for me, I wondered how many souls were waiting for someone to listen, to share that magical spark of dialogue that could illuminate their own path. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. The power of conversation held the keys to healing not only my heart, but the hearts of many. And so I made a decision then and there to become a beacon of empathy and understanding through conversations that ignite healing, connection, and compassion. The journey forward was daunting, but I was ready. After all, in that moment with Alex, I had uncovered a truth that is now etched in my heart. Communication is not just a tool, it's the lifeline we can all cling to during the storm. Chapter 8: Physical Activity as a Stress Buster. Discovering Movement. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Tina first dragged me into that small, brightly lit studio filled with funky posters and the unmistakable vibe of energy. I had always been the kind of person who preferred the couch over cardio, but her unrelenting enthusiasm was hard to resist. "Just one class, and you'll see," she had assured me, wielding a pair of neon pink weights like they were the gateway to enlightenment. Somehow, I found myself in a realm of movement that I never imagined could bring me so much joy. As we began with our warm up, I quickly realized I was surrounded by a diverse group of people. There were mothers, college students, and even silver haired seniors, all moving to the infectious beat of the music. Despite my initial reluctance and self consciousness, I couldn't help but feel a spark of camaraderie. This was more than just a class, it felt like a communal release. Each squat, each jump, acted as a rhythmic pulse that nudged away the stress and worries I carried from my week. I was discovering that the essence of movement extended beyond fitness. It was a shared language of vulnerability and strength that connected us all. As the weeks rolled on, my visits to the studio became a ritual. I left behind the tightness in my chest that seemed to balloon with each stressful day and emerged instead with a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in ages. My muscles ached in the most beautiful way, a reminder of my body's capability and resilience. It wasn't just physical transformations that ensued. I found that the emotional release was monumental. During one particularly challenging session, engulfed in a sea of sweat, I started to truly understand how engaging in movement could serve as a vessel for processing pent-up emotions. By the time I hit the midpoint of our fitness journey, I was hooked, craving each session like an addict. Movement had transformed from a reluctant duty to an eagerly anticipated escape. One evening, however, something shifted. Just as we were about to commence an intense round of cardio, the energy in the room dampened as news of a friend's crisis began to spread among a few participants. I could feel the tension draping over the room, heavy and palpable. It was as if the weight of the world collided with the positivity we had built. But then, Tina stepped into her role as our motivator, her smile radiating warmth despite the gravity of the situation. "Let's channel this energy," she said, her voice resolute. "Let's move for ourselves and for each other." There was an impulse in me that sparked fiercely at that moment. That day, we poured every ounce of emotion into those movements. Each kick, every punch mirrored the frustrations and fears we carried. I realized then that this outlet, this dance, this sweat, wasn't merely about fitness. It was a cathartic expression. As the songs crescendoed and we pushed ourselves to the limit, I felt a bond strengthen among us. I finally understood that this wasn't just about achieving physical strength, but building emotional resilience. Together, we released our burdens, embodied courage, and uncovered resilience we didn't know we possessed. As I left the studio that evening, exhausted yet elated, a question lingered in my mind. What if this newfound joy of movement could accompany me beyond the studio walls? How could I sustain this momentum, this revelation in my everyday life? I felt an invigorating anticipation laced with uncertainty. My journey with movement, or rather, my relationship with it, was just beginning, and I was ready to explore. The joy of dance. There's something about music that can transform a room, isn't there? When that first beat drops, it seems to pull everyone into a shared experience, one that transcends words or worries. I fondly remember my first dance class with my friends. The moment we stepped into that studio, the world outside faded away. As the teacher turned on the music, it felt like the chaos of life, school stress, work demands, personal struggles, melted into the background, replaced by the rhythm that flowed through our feet and filled our hearts. We weren't just moving, we were expressing the turmoil of our lives through every twist, turn, and leap. Each lyrical line created a canvas for our emotions. Happiness, frustration, pain, and jubilation danced together in a beautiful chaos. My friends and I would laugh as we stumbled through the steps, finding ourselves lost in the music, shedding our inhibitions like an old coat. The joy was intoxicating. With each class, I noticed something magical happening, a release from the burdens I carried. It wasn't merely dancing, it was therapy. As I spun and twirled, I realized that losing myself in this movement was a way to reclaim a part of me I thought I had lost. The introspective journey became evident in those moments of euphoric freedom on the dance floor. I began to understand that beyond the physicality of dance, there was a deeper connection to joy and resilience. When the teacher cued a crescendo, my heart would race, and I could feel the weight of the world lift, if only for a brief moment. However, there's a constant tension in this liberation. We often have to choose between the demands of daily life and the calls of our heart. I could feel the pull of responsibilities creeping in like an unwelcome guest, threatening to disrupt this newfound joy. With the end of each class, as we settled down and caught our breath, a sense of satisfaction washed over me. Yet in those fleeting moments of stillness, a realization took root. Life's chaos would always return. I had to make a choice: to continue nurturing the joy of dance amid the clamor, or to let it fade into the background. The more I danced, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a hobby for me. It was a lifeline, a vibrant thread woven into the fabric of my existence. And I knew I had to embrace it with open arms, even as the outside world continued to whirl around me. Finding my fitness groove, life is a constant balancing act, isn't it? You have your work, your responsibilities, and somewhere in the mix, you're supposed to find time for exercise. As someone who often misplaces my motivation like a set of keys, the quest for the right kind of workout has been nothing short of an adventure. Struggling to fit a rigid gym routine into my lively personality was akin to trying to put a square peg in a round hole. Every time I thought I had it all figured out, I tripped over my own enthusiasm and landed smack dab into chaos. Take, for instance, my brief flirtation with boot camp classes. I walked in, full of bravado and a falsely inflated sense of confidence, thinking, how hard can it be? Spoiler alert, it can be very hard. Within minutes, I found myself in a torturous drill sergeant's version of Simon Says. The instructor, a wiry woman with biceps that could probably lift a Mini Cooper, was barking orders like I was training for the Olympics. As the sweat poured down my back and mingled with my sense of impending doom, I realized I had signed up for a hardcore version of what I now affectionately refer to as fitness fear factor. Picture this. In an attempt to demonstrate my willingness, I dove into a set of burpees with the energy of a caffeinated squirrel. The first one was invigorating. By the fifth, my body was negotiating a peace treaty with gravity. When I leapt into the air and tripped over my own feet, I smacked the mat with the grace of a fallen tree. The collective gasp of the class, followed by peals of laughter, made me want to curl into a tight ball and roll out the door. But then, as I lay there pondering my life choices, something remarkable happened. I found myself laughing, not just at my clumsiness, but at the sheer absurdity of it all. That was when it hit me. While burpees may not be my jam, there's a certain beauty in making fitness fun, or at the very least, entertaining. After that boot camp disaster, I embarked on a mission to find my fitness groove, the magical blend of physical activity and sheer enjoyment. I tried everything from salsa dancing to rock climbing, seeking joy wherever I could find it. I finally realized that finding my groove wasn't just about physical challenges. It was about aligning fitness with who I am. Whether it was dancing like nobody was watching in my living room or brisk walking with a podcast, each trial brought me closer to a realization. The best workout is the one that feels less like an obligation and more like a celebration of movement. And as I found alternatives to the dreaded burpees, I encouraged everyone around me to find their groove too. Because, truth be told, if you can't laugh at yourself while exercising, you might be taking it just a bit too seriously. Chapter 9: Creativity and Expression. Art as a Release. There's something uniquely liberating about taking a brush to canvas or a pencil to paper. It's as though the moment you dip into that vibrant pool of paint or sharpen the tip of your graphite, you're given permission to let go of all the noise swirling in your mind. I discovered this truth on a wet autumn afternoon, sitting at the dinner table with Mia, my artistic friend whose enthusiasm for color and form ignited my own dormant creativity. As raindrops tapped against the window, we spread out our supplies: tubes of acrylics, brushes of all sizes, and sketchbooks that beckoned like blank slates waiting for dreams to be drawn. Mia has always been a free spirit, a whirlwind of ideas that seemed to dance around her. I often found myself tangled in the complexity of my thoughts, the stresses of everyday life weighing heavily on my shoulders. But in those moments, surrounded by color and laughter, I felt something shift within me. The act of creating became a refuge, a way to express my tangled emotions without the constraints of words. Painting with Mia taught me that the canvases were not just surfaces to decorate, they were a sanctuary, a way to channel my innermost feelings into something tangible, something that could be seen and understood, even if only by myself. As we delved into our projects, I became acutely aware of how art had a magical ability to transform my stress into strokes of brilliance. Each swirl of paint seemed to lift a bit of the weight from my heart. I would start with abstract splashes before finding my rhythm, coming to embrace the chaos of it all. Mia, with her keen eye, would invariably pop her head over, guiding, encouraging, and sharing snippets of wisdom. Just let it flow. The beauty lies in the imperfections. Those simple words resonated with me far beyond the canvas. They became a mantra that I began to carry with me, a reminder that nothing had to be perfect. But there was a tension simmering beneath, that familiar urge to create something magnificent that threatened to pull me back into my mind. What if I failed? What if the world judged my work as unworthy? On the edge of understanding that art could be freeing, doubt lingered. As we painted, I felt moments of anxiety rear their heads, leaving me frozen in indecision, staring at my palette as if it were a mountain I had to climb. Yet it was precisely in these moments of struggle that the true power of art emerged. Every stroke was an act of defiance against that voice, whispering doubt. I realized that the bigger battle was not with the paints, but against myself. And that's where the release dwelled, in embracing every facet of my journey, not just the polished final product. That Halloween night, the air crackled with anticipation as we decided to host a small gathering. Inviting friends over felt like a creative project in itself, but deep down I felt a pang of anxiety. What if they saw my unfinished canvases? What if they critiqued my recent work? Just as I was about to backtrack, Mia nudged me, her eyes ablaze with mischief and joy. "Here's your chance to embrace vulnerability," she said, her voice steady. And so, I took a deep breath and plunged forward, transforming the tension into excitement. Laughter flowed as paint splattered and conversations flowed seamless, reminding me that art was meant to be shared, a vessel of connection, rather than just a solitary pursuit. With every painting unveiled, I felt the tension break, an undercurrent of camaraderie weaving through us. Yet amid the joy, one painting hung on the wall, half finished and more exposed than I anticipated. As the evening wore on and glasses clinked, my gaze kept drifting back to it, the unfinished canvas whispering secrets of insecurity. What I hadn't realized was that it was those moments of uncertainty that birthed dialogue and connection, friends sharing their own stories of vulnerability. As they gathered around that half-painted piece, discussing what they saw, I felt a rush of warmth and understanding wash over me. In that shared space, art became a release for not just me, but for everyone present. It was a doorway that led us to deeper conversations, allowing the stresses of our lives to fade in the light of creativity. Writing my story. Writing has always been more than just a pastime for me. It has been a lifeline. I can still remember the very first time I picked up a pen, feeling like I was dipping it into my soul. Ink flowed with every stroke, releasing a gusher of emotions I never knew I had bottled up inside. In those early days, my thoughts were raw and fragmented, but putting them on paper transformed chaos into clarity. For me, writing was a refuge, a space where the noise of the outside world faded, and I could face the tumultuous waves of my mind. As I moved through different phases of life, I discovered that journaling held therapeutic benefits that I had never anticipated. In my teenage years, when I was grappling with identity and self worth, my journal became a confidant. I pored over pages filled with angst, dreams, and fears. The pages bore witness to my screams of despair, but they also captured snippets of hope and aspirations, and slowly, those words began stitching together a clearer picture of who I was. Each entry felt like a step toward understanding and healing. The therapeutic power of music. Music has always been more than just a collection of notes to me. It has been a trusted companion, an emotional outlet, and an undeniable lifeline. During periods of stress, I found myself instinctively reaching for my headphones, searching for that perfect song that could reflect my turmoil or transport me to a serene state of mind. Creating playlists became an art form, each song carefully selected to encapsulate the feelings I was grappling with, like the melancholic strains of a ballad when my heart felt heavy, or the upbeat rhythms of pop when I needed a jolt of energy to shake off the clutches of anxiety. There was a particularly challenging summer in my life, marked by transitions and uncertainties. I remember the long afternoons spent searching for solace in my music library. I would lose track of time, enveloped in a cocoon of melodies that spoke to the core of my experiences. I crafted themed playlists, one for heartbreak, another for motivation, a third for those moments when the world seemed unbearably large. Each playlist felt like a celebration of my emotional landscape, and through them I learned the power of music to heal. Research supports this notion. Studies have shown that music can reduce stress, relieve anxiety, and even enhance our overall well-being. What I had intuitively discovered was something anchored in science, a profound connection between our emotions and the rhythms that echo in our ears. There were evenings when the weight of the world felt particularly heavy, and the quiet struggle to quiet my racing thoughts would seem never-ending. On one of those nights, I turned to my old, tattered playlist labeled Calm. I pressed play, and as the soothing sounds washed over me, I could feel the tension in my shoulders begin to dissipate. The music was a gentle reminder that it was okay to slow down. It became a bridge to a place where the chaos of life melted away, leaving behind only clarity and peace. Yet, just as the last note faded, I would occasionally feel a creeping anxiety clawing back, a reminder that music, while powerful, was just one piece of the puzzle. But didn't I often wish for deeper connections? Wouldn't it be easier if the music itself could heal the wounds left by life's unpredictable tempo? One night, after an especially trying day, I decided to reach beyond my personal playlists and explore new genres. This became a turning point. I ventured into world music, discovering orchestral pieces that pulled at my heartstrings and rhythms from cultures different from my own. Each new track felt like I was forging a new path in my healing journey. It was exhilarating, almost intoxicating. The more I listened, the more I felt empowered to face my struggles head on. Music expanded my emotional vocabulary in ways I never anticipated. As I began to explore these new sounds, I noticed a shift within myself, a growing resilience, a willingness to embrace the uncertainty rather than shy away from it. Near the end of that tumultuous summer, something unexpected happened. Instead of legacies of anxiety or melancholy in my playlists, I started adding songs that propelled me towards themes of hope and possibility. This evolution was startlingly beautiful. I was no longer the passive listener. Music and I were co-creators of my own emotional narrative. Yet, as my playlists became increasingly optimistic, I was aware of the tension brewing inside me, a residual doubt lurking like a shadow. Could I truly believe in the hope I now curated? This thought lingered like a haunting song replaying in my mind, echoing just below the surface. Would everything be okay? Were these feelings of peace but a temporary respite? The weight of uncertainty grew heavier with each passing day, humming in a frequency I couldn't dismiss. Chapter 10: The Importance of Sleep. Understanding sleep and stress. It's funny how sleep seems like an elusive dream, isn't it? I can distinctly remember nights spent tossing and turning, my mind racing with thoughts about deadlines, relationships, and all the tiny details I had to manage during the day. The irony is that in my quest to tackle stress, my worries often wrapped around my neck like a tight noose, squeezing away the very thing I needed most: sleep. This chapter isn't just a deep dive into the science. It's a personal exploration that, if I'm lucky, might resonate with you and help navigate the murky waters of sleeplessness. One afternoon, I found myself seated in a cozy office adorned with calming art and soothing colors, opposite Dr. Reed, a sleep specialist who looked like he had just stepped off a Zen retreat. He exuded a calmness that was contagious. Sleep and stress are intricately linked, he explained, his voice smooth and reassuring. When we are stressed, our bodies are on high alert. This fight or flight response can rob us of restorative sleep, creating a vicious cycle. I nodded, absorbing the pearls of wisdom he shared, as I connected the dots between my restless nights and my anxiety-laden days. Dr. Reed emphasized something I would later revisit multiple times: the importance of prioritizing sleep as a cornerstone of effective stress management. Think of sleep as your body's reset button, he said. When you skimp on it, you jeopardize not just your mental well-being, but your physical health too. I thought back to the colorful nights I spent scrolling through social media or binge-watching shows instead of embracing tender lull of sleep. As comfortable as it felt in the moment, I unknowingly sealed my fate in a cycle of exhaustion and tension. From personal experience, I learned that the way I approached my bedtime made all the difference. I began to develop habits that allowed for a smooth transition from wakefulness to sleep, like dimming the lights an hour before bed and putting down my devices. As I spoke to Dr. Reed about these changes, he smiled knowingly. These are great steps, he affirmed, but don't overlook mindfulness practices. Have you considered meditation? My heart fluttered at the thought of sitting still with my thoughts, but the idea intrigued me, a possible antidote to my restlessness. The conversation went on, delving deeper into techniques to release stress, and I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. With each nugget of insight, I began to reshape how I viewed both sleep and stress. I collected strategies like precious stones, examining them for their practicality and potential impact on my life. But as our time came to an end, a different kind of tension settled into my chest, a familiar dread of forgetting these lessons in the whirlwind of daily life. Would I truly be able to prioritize sleep, or would the relentless tide of stress pull me back under? My bedtime rituals: as the sun dips below the horizon and paints the sky in hues of orange and purple, I instinctively start winding down, entering what I've dubbed the soft hour. It's not just the end of a day, it's a sacred time I've learned to cherish. My husband Jamie and I have curbed the rampant rush of our daily lives, carving this cozy cocoon of calm to prepare our minds and bodies for sleep. It wasn't always this way. There was a time when the evenings plunged us into chaos. Endless scrolling through our phones, fleeting conversations drowned in our to-do lists, and a mounting sense of unrest that felt like a weight upon our chests. Over the years, though, I've come to realize that bedtime rituals are crucial, not just for an untroubled night, but for the overall quality of life. It started small: a soft glow from a lamp instead of harsh overhead lighting, maybe a splash of lavender essential oil diffusing in the air. Over time, each little addition transformed our room into a safe haven, one where worries melted away and sleep found its way back to us. I can still recall one particularly restless night just a few months ago. We tossed and turned, both exhausted yet too wired to find peace. That was our wake-up call, nudging us to embrace a new approach towards our evenings. We began taking more deliberate steps, starting with shutting off all screens an hour before bed. At first, it felt as if we were cutting off our lifelines, but soon we discovered a world brimming with possibilities. We picked up books that had been gathering dust and engaged in each other's company, relishing conversations the way we used to when our relationship was fresh and new. Recently, I found an intriguing article on the power of gratitude practices before sleep. Inspired, I suggested we share 3 things we loved about our day. Jamie's smile as he recalled a morning coffee shared with me was the magic touch I didn't know we needed. Even the act of getting ready for bed transformed into a shared ritual. As we put on our matching pajamas, it felt less like a chore and more like a cozy tradition. Once our heads hit the pillows, we sank into a routine full of intimate storytelling. Last night, for instance, Jamie recounted his childhood adventures, weaving humor and nostalgia while I listened, my heart swelling in the warmth of his words. There was something soothing about those exchanges. They blurred the lines between day and night and made drifting off to sleep a gentle descent. As I delve deeper into these practices, though, I face a recurring challenge: the gap between my intentions and reality. One evening, when Jamie mentioned an unresolved work issue, it gnawed at the back of my mind like a stubborn splinter. As we settled into our routine, my focus faltered, leading to that disquiet familiar from sleepless nights past. The tension in the room felt palpable, tugging at both of us, as I struggled to separate the day's worries from our sacred night. I knew we were so close to making this a haven, but that day's weight refused to unshackle its hold. If I couldn't let go, how could I expect us to form the truest connection? But instead of succumbing to frustration, I took a breath and turned toward Jamie. "Can we try something?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Thankfully, his eyes sparkled with the acceptance of a kindred spirit. We created a safe space to voice our concerns, not to dwell on them, but to release them into the ether. A few minutes later, surrounded by our soft blankets, we surrendered our troubles into jokes and laughter, the kind that reverberated in our souls. That was when I realized that rituals aren't just about what we do, but how we connect, evolving with each sunset. And with that, the ritual has turned into something deeper than sleep. It has become our sanctuary. Together, we embrace both the beauty and the messiness of our lives, drawing us closer just when the weight of the day feels too heavy to bear. We still have restless nights and challenges, but now we face them arm in arm, learning that a good night's sleep isn't just about falling into slumber, but about nurturing our shared experiences, weaving a tapestry of love and tranquility as the night unfolds. Facing insomnia. There's a certain hollowness in the early hours of the morning, a deceptive quiet that makes the world feel weighted. I remember the first time I felt it. 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, my mind racing with a myriad of worries that shifted and squirmed like restless shadows. The clock would tick, and each minute stretched out an eternity. It felt less like sleeplessness and more like a slow surrender to my thoughts. I had always prided myself on my ability to handle stress, to juggle a full schedule, and still manage to find time for my passions. But suddenly, with insomnia gripping my nights, everything felt different and so much heavier. The chaos in my head often seemed linked to the pressures of my daily life. Work deadlines lined themselves up like impatient guests at a party I never wanted to host. I carried the weight of unexpressed frustrations and responsibilities, and pretending everything was fine became exhausting. I started to dread bedtime. Lying in bed felt like an invitation to wrestle with anxiety, rather than a sacred moment of rest. I tried the age-old method of counting sheep, but those woolly creatures never brought the sleep I so desperately craved. That's when I decided to seek help, an act I previously shunned out of stubbornness. Dr. Patel, my new ally in this fight against sleepless nights, listened attentively as I recounted my frantic battles with insomnia. Compassionate yet pragmatic, he carefully laid out a plan that blended cognitive behavioral therapy techniques with lifestyle adjustments. Together, we created a new bedtime ritual: a warm cup of chamomile tea to soothe my frazzled nerves, coupled with a digital sunset. My gadgets were switched off an hour before bed to ease into sleep. Small, seemingly insignificant changes started to accumulate, creating ripples of hope. As the weeks rolled by, I discovered that I had a power I had long overlooked: the ability to rediscover my connection to self-care. I began journaling at night to release the thoughts that crowded my mind, a practice that became both cathartic and enlightening. But there were moments when progress felt dormant, and I questioned the efficacy of my attempts. One particularly harrowing week, I found myself again staring at the ceiling, feeling the familiar fear of losing yet another night to the darkness of endless thoughts. My mind felt like a malfunctioning clock, racing forward while my body remained stranded in stagnant chaos. But just when frustration threatened to consume me, an unexpected revelation dawned. Every sleepless night had a lesson hidden somewhere in the tumult. Those midnight hours spent contemplating could also nurture creativity, ignite reflection, and reveal insights obscured by the day's busyness. With Dr. Patel's support, I stumbled upon the transformative power of mindfulness meditation, guiding me to embrace the present moment instead of fearfully anticipating sleep's escape. Yet, as I sat in meditation one night, my heart began to race, echoing the tension that had long resided within me. I revisited the shadows I thought I had tamed, and dread bloomed anew. I feared confronting those buried worries. Could it be that my insomnia was more than just a fierce foe? Perhaps it was a voice demanding attention, an unresolved narrative demanding to be articulated. With fear clawing at the edges, I realized that insomnia wasn't merely a battle against sleeplessness. It was me facing the remnants of old anxieties that festered in the dark. The path ahead loomed uncertain, and as I braced for another confrontation with my inner demons, I understood. Surrendering to the struggle without surrendering my will to heal was the key. Perhaps, just perhaps, embracing the unknown would illuminate the darkness. As the clock struck midnight yet again, I readied myself for a journey onward, a continuation to find peace within the chaos of restless nights. Chapter 11: Nutrition for the Mind, Food and Mood Connection. It started on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm chamomile tea. I was supposed to be working on an article about productivity when instead, my thoughts drifted to how I'd been feeling lately, cloudy and unfocused, like the sky outside. I realized this wasn't just about a bad day, but rather a culmination of months where my emotional well-being often ebbed and flowed with what I ate. My diet had become a reflection of my mood, as I oscillated between indulgent comfort foods and a desperate attempt to eat healthy. But what did this all mean? As if hearing my inner dialogue, my phone chimed with a message from Sarah, my dietitian. Food affects our mood more than you think. Let's chat about it. She always had a way of making complex nutritional science accessible, and in that moment, I felt a flicker of hope. I needed to understand the connection between my eating habits and my emotional state. Was there a tangible way to lift my spirits through food? With her expertise, maybe I could turn my dining experience into a tool for healing. The day of our meeting, I wasn't just excited, I was intrigued. Sarah greeted me like an old friend, her warm smile instantly putting me at ease. We dove into the research, omega-3 fatty acids promoting brain health, the role of vitamin D in combating depression, and how a plethora of colorful fruits and vegetables could fight anxiety and stress. As we discussed the nutrients that could recalibrate my mood, I felt a sense of empowerment building within me. Here was a chance to take control, to forge a new relationship with food, one that would nourish not just my body, but my mind as well. But as I began to weave these insights into my everyday meals, stocking up on avocados, wild salmon, and bright berries, my old habits clung to me like shadows. It felt like I was standing at a fork in the road, pulled towards the comforting arms of takeout and fried snacks, while desperately trying to embrace the kale and quinoa that promised wellness. The tension was mounting, a battle against my ingrained cravings and my desire for happiness. And soon, the stress of resisting those cravings made me snappy and irritable, a paradox of knowledge and desire entangled within the fiber of my being. Then came the breakthrough, a vibrant, colorful smoothie bowl that Sarah had suggested. As I blended the heavenly mix of spinach, bananas, and chia seeds with almond milk, a hope began to bubble inside me. Would this bowl of goodness be the bridge over the troubled waters of my moods? I topped it with nuts and berries, each ingredient a promise of lightness. Taking that first bite was cathartic. It felt as though I was tasting not just food, but a new possibility. But as I savored the flavors, I couldn't shake the anticipated shadow of a craving creeping back. What if this wasn't enough? What if old habits pulled me back into the comfortable yet destructive routine? The tension hung thick in the air, a reminder that the real challenge lay ahead. My journey to healthy eating. It was a crisp Saturday morning when I first realized that my relationship with food needed a serious makeover. As I wandered through the colorful aisles of the local farmers market, the vibrant hues of fresh produce captivated me. I remember stopping in front of a stall overflowing with tomatoes, plump, juicy, and redder than I had ever seen. At that moment, I felt an undeniable connection to the earth and how the foods we choose can reflect our inner state of health. This marked the beginning of my journey toward healthier eating habits. Initially, I approached healthy eating with the same enthusiasm one reserves for a new gym membership, filled with hope, but unsure of how to sustain it. My close friends could see it in my eyes. A sense of dread still loomed over meal prep. Cooking felt more like a chore than a ritual. One evening, while chopping bell peppers and struggling with a recipe that promised more labor than flavor, I turned to my friend Mia, who was dancing to a tune on the radio while prepping her own meal. "How do you make this look so easy?" I asked, half joking. Mia simply smiled and replied, "I let the food speak to me." It was in that moment I realized that cooking could be an inviting dance, not a daunting task. With each cooking night, I became more aware of what I was putting into my body. We documented our progress, sharing how each meal fueled our workouts and lifted our spirits. The transformation wasn't just physical. I felt lighter emotionally. I used to reach for junk food when stress hit, but now we found joy in creating wholesome dishes that simmered away our worries. One night toward the end of summer, while sipping on our homemade veggie smoothies, I realized I hadn't had a single greasy meal in weeks. The glow from my friends' faces matched the radiant color of the veggie array before us. As summer transitioned to autumn, our dinners shifted from salads to comforting soups and stews. I remember a particularly chilly evening, one where the wind howled outside while we huddled around a large pot of lentil soup. The warmth enveloped us, nourishing not just our bodies, but also our spirits. As we stirred the ingredients together, I shared with them how the act of preparing meals had become a meditation for me, not just for nutritious food, but for personal reflection. Each spoonful was a reminder of where I had come from and how far I had yet to go. But just when I felt that I was making substantial strides toward a healthier lifestyle, a little voice of doubt crept in. Was I really doing it for myself, or was it just to keep up with my friends? Deep down, I feared that this new venture was merely a phase, one that would fade as quickly as it had come. That thought consumed me one evening just before a planned cooking night, and I stood frozen in my kitchen, questioning every effort I had made thus far. Did I have the strength to keep going? As I faced that daunting question, I took a long look at the colorful fruits and vegetables laid out before me. Suddenly, I remembered the joy and connection they had brought into my life. Maybe this wasn't just about the food. It was a celebration of the choices we make each day. With that realization, I picked up my chef's knife, my heart racing with a new sense of determination. Cooking as a form of meditation. When I first stepped into the kitchen, I was a novice with a spatula and a recipe torn from a magazine. I approached cooking as a mere necessity, a way to fill my stomach at the end of a long day. But over time, that simple act of mixing flour, water, and a dash of salt began to morph into something profound. What started as a chore slowly transformed into a sanctuary, a place where the chaos of the outside world could melt away with each stir of a spoon. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, but rather a gradual realization. I found myself gravitating toward the kitchen, not simply out of hunger, but out of a desire to escape. Escape the noise, the lingering stress, the expectations that seemed to hang heavy in the air. I started to immerse myself in the ingredients, the crunch of fresh vegetables, the vibrant colors of spices, the aroma of garlic sizzling in olive oil. Each moment became an invitation to be present, to forget the ticking clock, and to embrace the rhythm of chopping, sautéing, and simmering. I began to explore new recipes, testing the boundaries of my culinary abilities. Each attempt was like a canvas awaiting strokes of creativity. As I measured out the spices, I would breathe in deeply, feeling the tension in my shoulders soften. The act of cooking became my meditation, each ingredient a breath in and each stir a breath out. I learned to focus entirely on the task at hand, and in doing so, I discovered a therapeutic rhythm that grounded me. I kicked off my shoes, rolled up my sleeves, and danced among the flavors, losing myself in the process. Then came the day when everything shifted. I decided to challenge myself with a complex dish, a vibrant paella that boasted layers of flavor, a symphony of seafood and spices. As I gathered ingredients, I felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. What if it didn't turn out right? But that thought slipped away like steam rising from a boiling pot. I reminded myself that the journey mattered more than the destination, that perfection was an illusion. With each step, chopping bell peppers, measuring saffron, and stirring the bubbling broth, I was consumed by the moment. I could practically hear my heartbeat in time with the sizzle of the pan. The world outside faded away. It was just me, the kitchen, and my creation. The rhythmic sound of the spoon against the pot became a mantra, one I could lose myself in, one that pulled me deeper into my meditative state. Just as the rice began to absorb the rich flavors, I felt layers of stress dissolving, a gentle reminder of the peace that had been lurking beneath the surface of my busy life. As I plated my dish, I couldn't help but marvel at the transformation. It wasn't just a meal, it was a testament to the healing that had taken place. The once frightening complexities of life had been distilled into this simple act of creation. But just as I savored the victory of my culinary endeavor, a thought struck me. What if I lost this sense of peace? What if the chaos returned to my kitchen, beckoning and demanding? That tension lingered like a shadow, a reminder of the fragile balance between tranquility and turmoil. I sat down to savor the fruits of my labor, my heart a mix of pride and an unease that buzzed beneath the surface. Was cooking truly a form of meditation, or was it merely a temporary escape? A part of me knew that to embrace it fully would mean integrating this practice into the fabric of my life. The challenge now lay ahead. How could I weave this newfound clarity into my everyday existence and find the meditative quality in the ordinary moments? The lingering doubt taunted me, yet I felt a flicker of excitement. It was time to explore the depths of this culinary meditation further, both in the kitchen and in the broader palette of life. Chapter 12, Setting Boundaries. Learning to say no. There was a time in my life when saying yes felt easier than breathing. I was the go-to person for favors, the friend everyone relied on, whether it was picking up someone's slack at work or simply being the shoulder to cry on. It was exhausting, but I thrived on that sense of being needed. After all, who doesn't want to feel valued? But deep down, a gnawing discomfort was lurking beneath my cheerful compliance, a persistent whisper that I was losing myself in the whirlwind of others' demands. The turning point came during a particularly hectic week. I had agreed to organize a community fundraiser, help my colleague with a daunting project deadline, and still manage to attend my friend's birthday party, all while juggling my own responsibilities. I burned the midnight oil until one evening, as I stared blankly at my computer screen, an email popped up inviting me to yet another last-minute planning meeting. My heart raced. I felt the heat of anxiety creeping in, but somehow, when I read the words "Mel, we really need your expertise," I of course replied with a resounding yes, ignoring the rising tide of overcommitment that was about to drown me. The next day, the weight of my commitments crashed down like a tidal wave. I was overwhelmed and completely drained. My mind whirred with thoughts, and I experienced a startling realization. I had sacrificed my own well-being for the sake of others' expectations. I took a step back to reflect, finally arriving at a profound conclusion. Just because someone asked didn't mean I had to comply. I needed to reclaim my time, my autonomy. Learning to say no became my new frontier. This was easier said than done. The prospect of telling someone no was terrifying, a pit in my stomach kind of fear. What if they were disappointed? What if they stopped asking altogether? But as I began to practice, it felt surprisingly empowering. At first, I started small, declining invitations to events that I knew would drain me rather than uplift me. With each no, my confidence began to grow. One memorable instance was when my friend asked me to coordinate a weekend trip for our entire friend group. My immediate instinct was to jump in and take charge. But instead, I took a breath and paused, thinking about my commitments. I felt the urge to explain myself in detail, to justify my reasons, but I simply said, "I can't take this on right now." I braced for the usual pushback, but to my surprise, my friend nodded and said, "I get it. Thank you for being honest." In that moment, I felt a shift, not just in my friendship, but deep within myself. As I honed my ability to say no, I noticed a remarkable change in my life. I was more present when I accepted commitments. I approached my work with renewed focus and creativity, and I found time to pursue the hobbies that once felt woefully out of reach. Yet, with growth comes tension. Acquaintances I'd always accommodated began to test my newfound boundaries. "But you always help," they would exclaim, bewildered by my sudden refusal. These comments tugged at my heartstrings, igniting a fierce internal battle. Was I being selfish? Should I give in for the sake of my relationships? The stakes were raised when my boss assigned me a project that would require both my weekends and my vacation time. In that moment, I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. Should I succumb to the pressure of workplace expectations, or should I stand firm in my resolve to protect my personal time? With my heart pounding, I sent an email outlining my concerns and proposed a more manageable timeline. Silence followed, stretching into a tense eternity. When the reply finally came, it felt like a lifeline. My boss acknowledged my points and suggested an adjustment, ensuring that I wouldn't need to work weekends. The relief flooded my system, overwhelming me with gratitude. Not only had I defended my boundaries, but I'd also opened a door for collaborative dialogue. In that moment, I realized that learning to say no was not just about refusal. It was about setting healthy boundaries that foster respect and understanding. As I continued my journey, I learned that embracing the power of no was ultimately about kindness to myself and to others. By saying no, I was actually saying yes to my own needs, my well being. I've come to appreciate the art of refusal, recognizing that it's not just a stop sign, but an invitation to prioritize what truly matters. I encourage everyone embarking on this journey to start small, embrace discomfort, and watch as their lives blossom with newfound clarity. Still, I find myself in situations where the urge to please tugs at my heart more than I'd like to admit. But now I stand firm. It's a continual practice, a dance. And while I know I'll stumble along the way, each no brings me closer to a more authentic life, one that is filled with intentional choices. The power of saying no is, in fact, a power I am learning to embrace, one heartfelt refusal at a time. My journey to self respect. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday morning when I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, struggling to recognize the person looking back. Who was I? The face seemed familiar, yet alien, softened by too many apologies and hardened by countless disappointments. It wasn't the reflection of someone who felt worthy or, more importantly, respected. This moment of introspection launched my journey to self respect, a path rugged and steep, peppered with lessons that would change not just how I felt about myself, but how I walked through the world. Growing up, it seemed that self doubt was a constant companion. My instincts whispered, "You don't belong here," or "You're not good enough." I often deferred to others' opinions, trying to blend in rather than stand out. The fear of judgment tangled tight around my throat, muting my voice when it mattered most. It was a slow erosion, the kind that doesn't happen overnight. It builds until one day you wake up and realize you've let everyone else dictate your worth. But I learned that change starts with awareness. I recall a late-night conversation with my best friend Mia, who held up a mirror, metaphorically speaking. "You keep giving away your power. You know that?" she asked. "Why do you let others decide what you deserve?" At first, I bristled at her words, defensive and unwilling to face the truth. Yet, the seed was planted, and I started recognizing the subtle ways I forfeited my worth to others. The more I researched self-respect, the clearer I became on its significance. It wasn't self-absorption, it was self-acknowledgement. Each little realization became a step in reclaiming my narrative. This understanding pushed me to take big leaps, including setting boundaries, something I had always struggled with. The first time I said no to a friend who habitually overstepped, my palms were clammy, my heart racing. But when they backed off, something in me shifted. The first taste of respect, both for myself and from those around me, was exhilarating. It felt like breaking free from a fog, stepping into sunlight, and the warmth was intoxicating. As with any journey, there were stumbles. There were well-meaning folks who questioned my choices, their words digging deep and reigniting old insecurities. "Are you really going to let this define you?" they would say. Moments like these made me doubt myself anew, but I learned that self-respect isn't always a straight line. It resembles a winding road filled with detours and bumps. I kept telling myself that every day was a new chance to choose respect over fear, and I consciously started to rewrite the internal dialogue that had sabotaged me for far too long. Through this journey, I also realized the power of vulnerability. Sharing my story of setback and triumph not only cultivated resilience, but also fostered connections with others who had been through similar struggles. I began speaking at local community events, encouraging folks to carve out their own journey towards self acceptance. Each story exchanged felt like another brick laid in the foundation of respect I was building. Yet, the path was not without its apprehensions. Just as I thought I'd mastered it, life threw me a curveball. A sudden job loss left me questioning my self worth all over again. I leaned back into my practices, surrounding myself with affirmations and supporters who uplifted rather than diminished. This vulnerability took time to nurture, but slowly I began seeing the value in my own worth, regardless of external factors. I am worthy became my mantra. I would write it on sticky notes, stick them to my fridge, my desk, anywhere I frequently looked. As the sun rose one fateful morning, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, I faced the biggest test of my newfound respect. I received a call for an interview for my dream job, the one I'd often thought was out of reach. My confidence faltered momentarily, whispering doubts danced through my mind. But this time, instead of succumbing, I squared my shoulders, looked in the mirror, and declared, "You are enough." On that day, I defined not just my potential, but the respect I required from both myself and the world. In the end, my journey to self respect is ongoing. Some days I wade through uncertainty, while on others, I glide, reveling in my worth. Every experience, whether triumphant or challenging, contributes to the tapestry of who I am becoming. I have learned that self respect isn't a destination, it's a continuous journey. As I continue down this path, I find the courage blooming within, ready to face the next chapter of my life with grace, dignity, and unwavering respect. Creating healthy boundaries. It's funny how I always thought boundaries were a sign of weakness. Growing up, I equated them with selfishness, or worse, being unkind. I remember a point in my early adulthood where I pushed myself to the limits, constantly agreeing to everything that came my way. A friend needed help moving? I was there. A colleague wanted to vent about their personal issues? Count me in. You name it. I was on call. It took a toll on me, but I never saw it coming until it felt like I was a puppet, strings pulled by everyone else's wants and needs. Then came the turning point, a particularly harrowing week I'll never forget. It was like my body finally waved the white flag. I fell asleep at my desk, completely drained from the endless favors, constant phone calls, and the pressure to always appear cheerful and accommodating. My friends and family rallied around me, expressing concern, but I couldn't find the words to explain that it was my own unwillingness to say no that had led to this breaking point. As I lay there in bed, feeling a mix of shame and exhaustion, I stumbled upon a book that changed everything. Boundaries: When to Say Yes, How to Say No, by Dr. Henry Cloud, opened my eyes to the importance of setting healthy limits, not just for myself, but for the relationships in my life. The idea was simple, yet profound. Boundaries are not barriers, but pathways to deeper connections and respect. The first practical step was recognizing that saying no is not the same as rejecting someone. It's about honoring my needs while still caring for others. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I decided it was time to test the waters. My first opportunity came when my neighbor asked me to babysit her kids on a Saturday evening, one of my very few free nights in a month. I felt the familiar twinge of panic creeping in as I thought about how disappointed she might be if I said no. Yet, the voice in my head urged me to assert myself. So I took a deep breath and replied, "I'm so sorry, but I have plans that night." To my surprise, she smiled and said, "No worries, I totally understand." It felt like I had just moved a mountain. I could hardly believe it. Each time I expressed a boundary, I found a sense of liberation, an exhilarating rush that encouraged me to keep going. But the real test came a week later. A close friend reached out, feeling overwhelmed and looking for support. My instinct was to jump right in and help, but this time I hesitated, weighing my own emotional bandwidth. As my mind raced, I knew that if I didn't speak up, I'd end up drowning in their turmoil. I paused before responding, feeling both anxious and empowered. What if they didn't understand? What if they got angry? Mustering my courage, I carefully articulated my feelings. "I care about you, but I need some time to recharge on my own before I can give you the support you deserve." There was a brief silence on the other end, and I held my breath. Then came a simple, "Thank you for being honest. I really appreciate you looking out for yourself." That was the moment I realized that healthy boundaries can actually strengthen relationships rather than weaken them. It's a delicate dance between self care and caring for others. However, not everyone took my new boundaries well. Some reacted with disbelief or outright hostility, leaving me shaken. "You've changed," they said. "Why are you being so rude?" It stung. Doubts crept in like unwelcome guests at a celebration. Had I made a grave mistake? Was I really selfish for wanting my time and space? I had to remind myself that healthy boundaries are sometimes met with resistance, and that's okay. I was learning to hold firm, to recognize that my worthiness didn't diminish in the face of criticism. Gradually, I witnessed how my relationships evolved, how people either adapted or, unfortunately, faded away. As painful as it was, it felt like a cleansing of sorts. Chapter 13: The Role of Humor. Finding Laughter in Adversity. It's funny how life has a knack for throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I remember sitting on the couch one rainy afternoon, the remnants of a failed job interview still fresh in my mind. I was nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, scrolling through social media, when I stumbled upon a meme that had me chuckling against my better judgment. It was one of those ridiculous cat videos that promised hours of procrastination neatly wrapped in fur and mischief. That little burst of laughter offered a momentary escape, paving the way for a more resilient mindset. I often think back to that day and realize how integrating humor into our lives, especially in times of adversity, can transform our experiences from burden to relief. Think about it. When was the last time you found yourself laughing in the midst of a crisis? My oldest friend, Sarah, had a way of turning our darkest moments into comedic gold. When she was diagnosed with a chronic illness that left her bedridden, I went over to check on her. Instead of basking in self-pity, she greeted me with a brightly colored wig reminiscent of a lion's mane, telling me she was auditioning for a role as a bedridden diva. We spent hours reminiscing, her spirit radiating even as she chronicled the harrowing journey she was on. In those moments, I realized laughter wasn't just a fleeting emotion, it was a healing force, a way to reclaim power in circumstances that seemed impossible. Sarah taught me that humor has a way of stitching together the frayed edges of even the darkest experiences. Research backs this up. Laughter triggers the release of endorphins, the body's natural feel-good chemicals, creating a sense of well-being. It is a scientifically proven remedy that reduces stress and even boosts immunity. Armed with this knowledge, I began to tackle my own challenges with a lighter heart. The next time I faced adversity, like when my best laid plans for a promotion went awry, I turned to humor. I hosted an impromptu Fail Fest dinner party where friends shared their worst career blunders. We were in stitches, and for one night, the weight of our collective struggles felt lighter. By accepting failure, and even celebrating it, we learned to navigate the uncomfortable, insistent truth that life would always be filled with setbacks and uncertainties. As I moved through that year with its attached difficulties, I gradually built a toolbox of strategies to dim the shadows. I surrounded myself with people who could laugh with me and at me when needed. I started jotting down the ridiculous things that happened day to day, embracing the chaos as fodder for humor. The story of a neighbor who mistook my frantic attempts at yoga for an impromptu interpretive dance routine became a cherished anecdote. I would often share it over coffee or in larger gatherings, and each time, laughter spilled forth, connecting us in shared vulnerability. It dawned on me that humor not only lightens personal burdens, it strengthens bonds within communities facing adversity together. Just when I thought I'd mastered the art of finding laughter in my struggles, life threw me yet another curveball. My father fell ill, a situation that could shake even the most steadfast among us. In the early days, I was lost, grappling with the severity of it all. One night, in an attempt to lighten the atmosphere, I brought over an old comedy DVD, his favorite, a classic I grew up with. As we laughed over the outrageous scenes, I realized something. While the world around us crashed and tumbled, laughter provided a sturdy life raft, keeping us afloat in turbulent waters. It wasn't simply about being cheerful. It was about finding moments of joy embedded in the struggle for normalcy amidst chaos. So here I am, sharing these musings, feeling a wave of warmth wash over me as I reflect on that journey. Finding laughter in the midst of adversity is not just a choice, it's a radical act of defiance against despair. Adversity will always be a part of life, but with humor, we can face it head on. Let us not forget to invite laughter into our lives, to embrace it fiercely, and to share it generously. In doing so, we can transform our darkest hours into stories worth telling, laughter echoing long after the struggle fades away. And as we share those stories, we remind ourselves and others that there's always light, even in the most tumultuous storms. My favorite comedians. Growing up, laughter was the language my family spoke. With a father who could mimic the entire cast of any classic sitcom, and a mother whose quick wit could slice through tension like a hot knife through butter, I was immersed in a world where humor was the bridge between experiences. It wasn't just about chuckles, it was the pulse of our household. And naturally, some comedians enamored me more than others, their unique styles resonating with who I was becoming. One of my earliest favorites was Robin Williams. His rapid fire impressions and unpredictable antics cracked me open in ways I didn't understand as a child. I vividly remember the first time I watched Mrs. Doubtfire. With every line, every absurd facial expression, I learned that comedy could blend humor and heart. Williams had this magical ability to dive into the depths of emotional turmoil, like his poignant moments in Good Will Hunting or his deep struggles with anxiety, yet soar in the next breath with the lightness of a helium balloon. His comedy transcended pure laughter. It was a reminder that humor could be found even in pain. Then there's Ellen DeGeneres, whose relatability and charm pulled me in from the moment she stepped on stage, neon blue background and all. Watching Ellen's stand up made me feel like I was sitting with a friend over coffee, sharing stories of awkward moments and pet antics. I admired her openness about connecting life's little quirks to universal themes. It felt revolutionary, especially as I navigated my teenage years, searching for my own identity. Ellen inspired me to embrace my quirks, showing that vulnerability could birth strength. Her journey towards acceptance, both personally and publicly, taught me the value of authenticity and kindness in the comedic narrative. Of course, I can't brush past the brilliance of Dave Chappelle. His incisive humor tackled complex social issues with a deftness that was both shocking and enlightening. When I first watched Chappelle's show, I was struck by how he could weave laughter through serious conversations about race, culture, and identity. It challenged me to see the nuances and layers of our society. Chappelle held a mirror to the audience, reflecting truths that were often uncomfortable, yet necessary to confront. Each punchline was a call to action, urging us to acknowledge underlying issues and prompting conversations that we desperately needed to have. Looking back, these comedians didn't just make me laugh. They taught me lessons on life, identity, and resilience. However, my admiration for them isn't merely rooted in comedy. It's about shared connections, the brave act of tackling uncertainty with a smile, and most importantly, the courage to go against the grain. But with great inspiration comes great responsibility. The tension thickens as I realize how these beloved figures traverse a landscape that isn't always welcoming. Each of their journeys faced trials, rife with societal judgment and personal sacrifice. It begs the question, at what cost does the quest for humor come? As I reflect on their narratives, the dark undertones of their tales shimmer through the laughter, reminding me that every joke has a backstory that deserves acknowledgement. The lightness of being funny. Have you ever noticed how humor has a magical way of lightening the heaviest of situations? One moment, you're mired in the weight of life's complexities, and the next, someone drops a perfectly timed joke that cuts through the tension like a hot knife through butter. I remember driving home after a long, exhausting week at work, my mind replaying every annoying email and tedious meeting. Just then, my carpool partner, a self-declared pun master, said, "I used to play piano by ear, but now I use my hands." I erupted into laughter. In that fleeting moment, the burdens of the week seemed to dissolve, if only for a second. Humor isn't just a way to entertain, it's a lifeline that can pull us from the depths of despair. As I delved deeper into the science of humor, I stumbled upon studies that showcase its importance for mental health. Laughter triggers the release of endorphins, those delightful little chemicals that make us feel good. They're nature's reward system, And let me tell you, nothing feels quite as uplifting as a hearty laugh. It's why, even on bad days, I strive to find something to smile about, whether it's a ridiculously cute cat video or a stand up special that resonates with my particular brand of humor. But here's the kicker: humor can also be a powerful tool to navigate difficult conversations, ease interpersonal tensions, or even challenge societal norms, all while keeping things light. Armed with these revelations, I slowly began to incorporate humor into my daily life, testing the waters to see how it could change not just my outlook, but also those around me. And yet, despite this understanding, I often find myself hesitating. What if I misjudge the moment, or even worse, offend someone? I realize this reluctance stems from a common fear: the fear of not being funny enough, or worse, being perceived as inappropriate. Yet, what I learned is that vulnerability and authenticity, combined with a hint of humor, can forge deeper connections. Take my friend Linda, who, during a particularly somber gathering, told a heartfelt story of her late dog, Max. As tears welled up in everyone's eyes, she lightened the mood by adding, "He had the ringworm of good humor, though he was more of a pause and a soft hearted cuddler." The laughter that followed was a cathartic release. We needn't shy away from the awkward moments. Instead, we can lean into them with a touch of levity. And it's in those moments I realized genuine humor doesn't come from a place of perfection. It thrives in imperfection, in our shared experiences of life's messiness. But as I became more attuned to the nuances of humor, I encountered a moment that challenged everything I thought I knew. A close friend faced a significant life change, a sudden job loss. I had initially planned to crack a joke to lift her spirits, but the shadow of her circumstances felt too heavy for humor. Yet there I stood, caught in a precarious dance between the urge to lighten her mood and the need to honor the gravity of her reality. In that moment, I learned a profound lesson. Sometimes the funniest thing you can do is to simply offer your presence, to listen instead of laugh. It's a delicate balance, one that often treads the line between comfort and comedy. The situation bubbled under the surface like a soda bottle waiting to explode, and I found myself questioning my own relationship with humor. As we explored the complexities of her feelings, I noticed a shift. My friend chuckled as she reminisced about the absurdity of her last job interview, and I eased her into a lighthearted banter that felt natural, not forced. In the end, we shared not only laughter, but also a deeper understanding of each other's struggles. It's easy to forget that humor isn't an escape, it's a bridge, a conduit for connection in both the high and low tides of life. It made me ponder how often we dismiss the healing power of humor, choosing instead to wrap ourselves in the armor of seriousness. Perhaps the true lightness of being funny lies in knowing when to wield humor and when to sit in stillness, acknowledging that sometimes it's stronger to listen than to laugh. Chapter 14: Embracing Imperfection, the Fallacy of Perfection. Growing up, I was a poster child for perfectionism. I meticulously arranged my pencil case by color and size, took pride in every neatly folded paper, and of course, became the kid who often heard, "You can do anything you set your mind to." Surrounded by praise for my spotlessness, I began to believe a dangerous narrative: that perfection was not just a goal, but a requirement. Little did I know that this insatiable thirst for flawlessness wasn't a golden ticket to success. Instead, it started to wrap around me like an ill-fitting sweater, tight and restricting, suffocating my very essence. Years later, I found myself in a corporate job that, at first glance, felt like the apex of my perfect career trajectory. But beneath the glossy surface, chaos reigned. I was tasked with leading a project, and the looming company deadline taunted me like a mischievous child pulling the strings of my mind. My team, composed of brilliant individuals, started to hesitate. They sensed my unyielding desire for a perfect plan and an error-free execution. I remember one late afternoon when one of my colleagues, Jenna, pulled me aside with furrowed brows and a brave heart. "You know," she said, "if we wait for everything to be flawless, we might never start." Her words struck a nerve within me. It reflected all the moments I had let fear dictate my actions. The reality hit me. The pursuit of perfection can paralyze us rather than propel us forward. No one truly dances in the path of perfection. We stumble, we misstep, we get messy. I started to wonder, Was I undermining not just my team's confidence, but my own creativity as well? Could it be that the very thing I was seeking was the one thing keeping us from moving forward? As I faced that precarious project deadline, I decided to try something radical. I shifted my mindset from perfect to progress. Jenna joined me in brainstorming sessions that felt less like corporate strategy meetings and more like free-form creativity circles. We fostered an environment where ideas could flourish, mistakes could be embraced, and learning was prioritized over perfection. Gradually, I started to let go of the incessant urge to control every detail. The shift was electric. The atmosphere turned light and vibrant with innovation. Days rolled by, and our project took on a life of its own, a mix of wild enthusiasm and genuine interest. I watched as my team flourished. They offered solutions I never could have imagined. We unveiled our work, and though it wasn't cookie cutter perfect, it resonated, fueled by collaboration and authentic expression. The applause echoed in my ears, but it was the collective achievement we celebrated that vibrated deeper within me. In that realization came a small epiphany. The fallacy of perfection is not just in its unattainable nature, but also in how it robs us of the ability to connect, to ourselves and to those around us. Seeking perfection led me away from emotional authenticity and towards isolation. Understanding this nuanced truth became a sunbeam piercing through the fog that had clouded my journey for so long. As I now sit here reflecting, I can't help but imagine a world where we release ourselves from the bondage of flawless expectations, the beauty in the messy, the joy in the authentic, and the power in our imperfections. It took a team to help me glimpse this vision, but the real revelation lies in unearthing our human essence, accepting that life won't always be polished, and that's exactly what makes the process worthwhile. So here's my invitation to you. The next time you're faced with a challenge, embrace the idea of progress over perfection. You may find, like I did, that the real joy comes not from how flawlessly we can execute a plan, but from how bravely we can navigate through moments of vulnerability, ready to learn, grow, and create something beautifully imperfect. A lesson from failure. It was a crisp autumn morning when I received the email that would change everything. The subject line read, "Your proposal, unsuccessful." My heart raced as I opened the message, only to be greeted by the polite but firm words of rejection. I had poured countless hours into crafting the perfect business proposal, convinced that I was finally on the cusp of achieving my long-held dreams. Instead, I found myself staring at the screen, a heavy sense of defeat sinking in. Just a few months earlier, I had set out with an enthusiastic resolve, painting vivid visions of what success would look like. Yet here I was, back to square one, and it stung more than I cared to admit. Initial feelings of disappointment morphed into a more profound contemplation about the nature of failure itself. I recalled the words of a mentor who once told me, "Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently." At that moment, I recognized that this was not merely about not securing funding or approval, it was about understanding what had gone wrong. Instead of packing away my dreams under handwritten labels of failed or not good enough, I needed to dig deeper. Each setback held within it a lesson, one that could either haunt me or empower me. So after a few days of wallowing, I decided to embrace a new journey, analyzing my failure. As I dissected the proposal and gathered feedback from trusted friends and colleagues, a pattern began to emerge. My excitement had overshadowed critical components of the pitch. I had focused too heavily on what I envisioned, neglecting the potential concerns of my audience. How could I expect them to buy into my dreams if I hadn't addressed why it mattered to them? This realization was startling, but it was also illuminating. Each misstep was a brick, and I had the chance to rebuild my foundation stronger than before. What had felt like a staggering blow now became a stepping stone, painful, yes, but essential for growth. I understood that failure wasn't the end of the road. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with newfound purpose and clarity. With renewed vigor, I set about reworking my proposal, viewing it through the lens of my audience rather than my aspirations. I took practical steps, researched their needs, incorporated feedback, and above all, infused empathy into my narrative. I had learned the importance of connecting with my audience, ensuring that my vision resonated with their goals. This time, I felt different, not just more prepared, but more connected. I had transformed my failure into an experience that deepened my understanding and honed my craft. Yet, just as I was getting into a rhythm, another wave of doubt crashed over me. What if the next round of pitches was just as disheartening? Could I withstand another rejection? The thought was paralyzing. In that moment of trepidation, I decided to anchor myself in the lessons learned, reminding myself that persistence and resilience mattered more than any single outcome. It was not a guarantee, but a promise to show up, learn, and grow. As I finally submitted the revised proposal, I took a deep breath, acknowledging both the fear and excitement swirling in my chest. Regardless of the outcome, I had already gained invaluable insights, transforming despair into determination. A lesson grasped, not just for the moment, but for the lifelong journey ahead. Sometimes it's in the failure that we find the keys to unlock our fullest potential. No matter how daunting the path may seem, each stumble leads us closer to the finish line we envision, if we allow it to teach us. With that thought, I hit send and embarked on a new chapter of resilience, heartened by the belief that every setback was merely a setup for a comeback. Learning to love my flaws. As I sat on my favorite worn-out couch, the sun casting a warm glow through the window, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. In the past, I wore my insecurities like an ill-fitting coat, heavy and uncomfortable, hiding myself behind layers of self-doubt and pretentious perfection. I've spent so much of my life trying to mold myself into an ideal version of who I thought I should be, only to realize that the real challenge was in learning to love the person I already was, flaws and all. Flaws. The very word can elicit a shiver down the spine. The imperfections we often view as glaring spots on our character are, in reality, the very brushstrokes that create the masterpiece of our individuality. I remember the first time I truly confronted my flaws. It was during a casual conversation with a close friend over brunch, the kind of friendly banter that usually brought laughter. Somehow, the topic of self-image emerged. I shared my list of perceived flaws, the habitual critics that echoed in my mind, and to my astonishment, my friend lovingly but firmly interrupted me. "You're not perfect, and that's okay. Your flaws, your quirks, your misunderstandings, your goofiness, they make you, well, you. I wouldn't want you any other way." The words hung in the air like a soothing balm. In that moment, I felt for the first time the urge to reconsider my narrative. What if my flaws were not something to be overcome, but rather elements to embrace? This revelation ignited a spark within me, prompting me to delve deeper into this new philosophy. Over the next few weeks, I started a small experiment. Each day, I would note one perceived flaw and attempt to flip my perspective. My tendency to be clumsy, I realized, had led to spontaneous laughter and lightness in serious moments. My penchant for daydreaming allowed me to cultivate creativity and vision in ways practicality couldn't touch. Each flaw I confronted blossomed into a conversation with myself, revealing the layers of beauty that lay beneath the surface. Yet, as I was on this path towards self-acceptance, I faced an unexpected tension. A storm was brewing in my personal life, as a friend I had grown close to suddenly distanced themselves from me. I felt an implicit judgment in their silence, an unspoken disdain for the very attributes I had begun to celebrate. My insecurity flared up, drowning my newfound wisdom in a wave of doubt. Was I foolish to embrace my flaws when others couldn't see past them? I sat on that couch again, the warmth of the sun now merely a distant thought, grappling with the shadows of self-loathing creeping back in. But here was the crucial moment. I realized that my journey towards self-acceptance was exactly that. Mine. I could choose whether to let someone else's perception dictate my worth. So with shaky hands, I picked up a piece of paper and penned a letter to myself. I acknowledged my pain, my doubts, and then I began listing all the reasons I had to love myself, just as I was. I spoke tenderly of my clumsiness, my quirks, my laugh, my fierce loyalty. And as I wrote, I felt the shadows of insecurity begin to lose their grip. I chose to honor the beauty in my flaws. Embracing my flaws wasn't a neatly packaged one-time event. No, the process requires constant nurturing and a healthy dose of self-compassion. The conversations at brunch became more frequent as I sought support from those who understood. We found comfort in vulnerability, sharing our own journeys filled with imperfections. I began to skin away the layers of shame associated with my flaws, allowing the radiant core of authenticity to shine through. As I continued this dance of acceptance, each misstep reminded me that life was not about perfection. It was about connection, understanding, and growth. I resolved that the next time I encountered that friend who had drifted away, I would approach them with love and understanding, unburdened by insecurity. I would embrace my flaws and remind myself that what makes us different also makes us human. Ultimately, loving myself fully meant extending that same grace to others, allowing imperfection to weave a beautiful tapestry of connection in my life. Chapter 15: The Journey to Calm. Reflecting on my growth. As I sit in my cozy nook, a steaming mug of chamomile tea cradled in my hands, I find myself peering into the rearview mirror of my life, amazed at the journey I've traversed. There was a time when I couldn't see past the worries that loomed like dark clouds over my every decision. It wasn't until I stumbled upon the power of reflection that I began to understand the true essence of my growth. Reflecting on our experiences is more than just a retrospective glance, it's an excavation of the self, unearthing the lessons buried beneath the surface of our daily lives. I think back to a particularly challenging year, a time when I felt like I was walking a tightrope stretched over an abyss. I had just started a new job, moved to a new city, and on top of it all, I was wrestling with self-doubt. The world felt vast and unfriendly, and I was a mere speck lost in its expanse. One evening, after stumbling through another day of trying and failing to fit in, I sank into my couch. I didn't know it then, but that was the night I would resolve to start journaling. Each entry became a safe haven for my thoughts, where I could explore my fears and celebrate my victories, no matter how small. Through the ink and paper, I began crafting a narrative that gradually shifted from one of despair to one of empowerment. Fast forward to today, as I read those early entries, I can see how deep the roots of growth can extend. I learned that growth doesn't always come dressed in success. Sometimes it wears the guise of failure. With each new challenge I faced, whether it was delivering a daunting presentation or navigating difficult conversations, I discovered resilience bubbling up within me. Instead of judging myself too harshly, I started to applaud my courage to try again, to evolve, and to embrace imperfection. I realized that, like a seed breaking through the soil into the sunlight, my growth required patience and nourishment, a mindset built on self-acceptance rather than relentless criticism. But a creeping thought lingered. Had I truly grown, or was I merely distracting myself? What lies ahead can be as intimidating as it is exhilarating. Growth, I learned, isn't linear. It often spirals back on itself, revisiting familiar lessons that demand deeper understanding. And as I breathe in the fragrant aroma of my tea, I recognize that the very act of wondering if I'm enough is, in itself, a sign of growth. It pushes me to confront my insecurities. So I ask myself, what lies dormant waiting to be awakened? I am on the edge of discovery, poised to embrace the next chapter of my life with courage, heart, and the wisdom of my reflections. There's a tension that builds in the quiet moments of reflection, a restlessness that whispers of change. A frenzy of thoughts surge through my mind. What if I don't have what it takes? What if I fall back into old patterns? Yet as I sat with those doubts, I felt something shift within me. The seeds of bravery I had sown in my heart began to sprout, demanding attention. I have a choice: to nurture those seeds, to water them with positive affirmations, and to surround myself with the support I have cultivated. Growth becomes not just a passive journey, but an active commitment to engage with every facet of my being. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting golden hues across my living room, I am reminded of the importance of celebrating where I've been while recognizing where I want to go. The choices ahead feel daunting, but they are rich with potential. I'm learning that true growth beckons me to step outside my comfort zone, to embrace uncertainty, and to trust in the process, no matter how unpredictable. With my past as my foundation and my dreams as my compass, I am ready to take the next step, whatever it may hold. Creating a stress management plan. Stress has an uncanny way of sneaking up on you, doesn't it? I remember a particular week when I had deadlines looming, family obligations piling up, and a coffee pot that was perpetually empty. It felt like I was walking a tightrope, balancing everything just right, yet one gust of wind, like a missed phone call or an unexpected email, could send me crashing down. That week, it became painfully clear that I needed a strategy, a plan to keep my stress levels in check. And so I embarked on creating a stress management plan. At first, I sat down with a cup of herbal tea because when in crisis mode, my barista's latte art just wouldn't cut it. I began jotting down what traditionally stressed me out: work pressure, financial concerns, and the chaotic rhythm of life with two kids. Once I laid it all out, I realized I had to break it down into manageable pieces. I researched various approaches to stress management: mindfulness, physical activity, and fostering connections with friends and family, just to name a few. The blend of theory and personal experience felt promising. It was the missing puzzle piece. To make my plan tangible, I crafted a stress oasis ritual. This was a sanctuary in my daily routine, a specific time set aside for activities that brought me joy and calm. I designated Wednesdays for yoga sessions, Thursdays for long walks in the nearby park, and Sundays for family board game nights. Each activity was a thread woven into the fabric of my well-being. At the same time, I made a pact with myself to recognize the difference between productive stress and the paralyzing kind. Cultivating self-awareness allowed me to notice when stress entered my life like an uninvited guest, and it gave me the tools to usher it back out. But honing this plan wasn't without its tensions. The real test would come in moments when life threw its curveballs, like when my son got sick or when work demands surged unexpectedly. With each week that passed, I adapted the plan, tweaking what didn't work and celebrating what did. But there were still moments of doubt. One fateful day, I received a phone call that made my heart drop. My workplace announced unexpected layoffs. Suddenly, the framework I had built felt like it might crumble under real pressure. I had to remind myself to ground my feet firmly on the floor, breathe deeply, and follow the very plan I had created. It was time to either reinforce my strategy or rethink it altogether. That moment, fraught with uncertainty, ignited the realization that my plan was a living, breathing thing, flexible and responsive to life's whims. Just as I stood at that crossroad of fear and resilience, I knew the real power of my stress management plan lay not just in its creation, but in its execution during times of crisis. Would I sink under the pressure, or could I rise to the challenge? With resolve overshadowing my uncertainty, I prepared to refine my comeback strategy, deeper and more resilient than before. The stakes felt higher than ever, and I could almost feel the tension simmering in the air. What would my path look like when my plan was put to the ultimate test? Living with intention and peace. Every morning, as the sun spills light into my bedroom, I am reminded of the power in setting intentions. My hands wrap around a warm mug of tea, the scent of chamomile weaving through the air like a gentle lullaby. In these quiet moments, I have learned that living with intention is not merely about ticking off to-do lists or chasing after fleeting goals. It's about cultivating mindfulness in everything I do, about creating a life that aligns with my core values. I take a deep breath, grounding myself in this moment, and as I sip the soothing tea, I reflect on how intentions pave the path toward peace. A few years ago, I felt caught in a whirlwind of busyness, racing from one obligation to another. I was the poster child for overcommitment, juggling work demands, social invitations, and personal expectations, all while neglecting my own well-being. I had only one speed: fast. Yet inside, an unsettling voice whispered for change. It began with a single moment of vulnerability, a quiet evening spent writing in my journal. I penned my thoughts and fears, the ink carving a path through my chaotic mind. In those lines, I recognized a yearning for peace, for a life imbued with intention rather than reaction. Shifting my focus from external obligations to internal desires required practice and persistence. I created small rituals that brought me back to center: morning meditations, nature walks, and setting aside time for creativity. Each ritual was a brushstroke on the canvas of my daily life, emphasizing the beauty of moments spent intentionally. I learned to say no when invitations threatened to overwhelm. Turning down events was as empowering as accepting them. As I began to make conscious choices, my life transformed into a peace-filled experience, rather than a series of haphazard events. However, as with any meaningful change, there were setbacks. On one particularly stressful week, the demands of work spiraled beyond my control. I felt like a ship tossed in turbulent seas. Panic surged within me as I dropped my intention to enjoy life and fell back into old patterns of stress and anxiety. I went to bed one night, feeling all too familiar with that sinking sensation of being overwhelmed. It was in that vulnerable moment, heightened by exhaustion, I realized I was standing on the precipice of chaos and clarity. Instead of succumbing to despair, I reached for my journal again. Writing had become my anchor, and I embraced it like a lifeline. I poured out my frustrations, reflecting on the daily chaos as a mere wave in the grand ocean of my life. With each word, clarity washed over me. I reminded myself of my commitment to peace, no matter how chaotic life felt. I grounded myself in the understanding that storms come and go, but the ocean of my intentions can remain calm if I chose, if I practiced deliberately. In that moment, I made a decision. I would not allow external circumstances to dictate my internal state. As the storm clouds of stress began to part, I found my footing once again. I focused on breathing deeply, on taking breaks to disconnect from my screen, to recalibrate my energy. It wasn't about denying my responsibilities. It was about prioritizing my peace so I could face them with clarity and grace. I knew this journey was ongoing, each day an invitation to return to intention, to sow seeds of peace in my routines. I held on to the hope that through each intentional choice, I could cultivate a sanctuary within, undisturbed by the winds of the world outside. And so, here I sit again, tea in hand, reflecting on my transformation. Each choice I make, however small, accumulates into the life I love. With warmth radiating through my being, I encourage you to explore this journey. What intentions resonate within you? What would it mean for you to prioritize peace over panic? I am living proof that even in the face of chaos, it is possible to reclaim your state of being through the practice of living intentionally. The real question is, will you take that first step? Thank you for joining us on this journey through stress management techniques, finding calm in chaos. We hope the insights and strategies shared in this audiobook have empowered you to better understand and manage stress in your life. Remember, the path to calm and tranquility is a continuous journey of self-discovery and growth. By implementing these techniques and nurturing a mindset of resilience, you can face life's challenges with greater ease and confidence. Stay committed to your well-being and always seek out moments of peace and mindfulness. If you found this audiobook helpful, we encourage you to revisit the chapters, share it with others, and continue exploring the many ways to cultivate a stress-free life. Thank you for listening, and may you find lasting calm in your journey ahead.